Black mark for Putin. The so-called Putin's car explosion is also a very vague story. What happened on the morning of June 3, 2010, when a motorcade was moving along Kutuzovsky Prospect in Moscow, in one of the cars of which its chairman, Vladimir Putin, was driving to a meeting of the government of the Russian Federation? As reported by RIA Novosti, on Kutuzovsky Prospect in the center of Moscow, one of the cars from the motorcade of Prime Minister Vladimir Putin damaged the wheel, said an official representative of the Federal Security Service responsible for the safety of top officials. After the inspection, the FSO officers found that the cause of the incident was a metal object that ended up on the carriageway. As a result, the wheel was depressurized, the source said. Despite the incident, the head of the government arrived at the White House without any delay, he said. In turn, a high-ranking source in one of the Russian special services, commenting on the incident on Kutuzovsky, expressed bewilderment that, in the center of the capital, on one of the routes for transport of protected persons, there are foreign objects. On the evening of the same day, June 3, 2010, the online publication Gazeta.ru, with reference to the broadcast of the radio station Echo of Moscow, quoted the words of an eyewitness of this incident. A cortege was driving in front of a restaurant. Smoke started coming from under Putin's car. It was not clear what was there specifically. The smoke went. All the cars began to surround this Mercedes. The FSO ran out of the jeeps, surrounded the Premier, transplanted it, he said. The source also claims to have a video of part of what happened. As another version of the incident with Putin's car, in addition to the mysterious metal object, the following sounded then. They say, the wheel of Putin's gelding flew into the ajar manhole of the sewer well. Strictly speaking, both reasons do not stand up to scrutiny. And that's why, in open internet sources, one can easily find a description of Putin's Mercedes. Vladimir Putin travels around Moscow in an armored limousine Mercedes-Benz S600 Guard Pullman. The length of the car is 6.2 meters, the weight is about 3 tons. The most advanced protection systems are installed on the machine. This car was inherited by Putin from Boris Yeltsin, the first president of Russia. Putin's car is equipped with a 6-liter V12 engine with a capacity of 400 horsepower. A video camera built into the trunk helps to observe what is happening behind the limousine. The communication and security systems of the car are kept in the strictest confidence. The armor of this vehicle is able to withstand fire from firearms and grenade explosions, and after the attack, the vehicle retains the ability to move. The Pullman isn't just covered in armor, it's made of armor. Armor plates are part of the power structure of the body. That is, not only the body is armored, but the entire structure. It is also known that the tires of the wheels of cars of this class are also made by special order. Their strength is so great that they cannot be pierced with a bullet fired from a firearm. Therefore, the version that the special wheel of a 3-ton super-armored member carrier could depressurize as a result of a collision with a sewer hatch or some kind of piece of iron that accidentally ended up on the roadway looks very, very doubtful. In addition, Kutuzovsky Prospect is the center of Moscow. The passage of VIPs in cars along it is a movement along a proven route, for which, as a rule, all surprises and force majeure that may occur are taken into account. That is why it is the version of external influence on the wheel of the car in which Vladimir Putin was following that seems more likely. Why these stories about the events in the Primorsky territory, about the murdered Major General of the GRU Anton Surokovnakov, about the accident with Vladimir Putin's car? And to the fact that they all confirm the considerations of Kirill Rogov from the publication in Novaya Gazeta, the machine of state administration that exists today in Russia is stalling and is gradually starting to overheat from the inside. Obviously, no one is immune from this overheating, including the creator of the current system of state administration, Vladimir Putin. Operation Sabotage. At the very end of April 2010, the government of the Russian Federation headed by Vladimir Putin classified information about the size of the Reserve Fund and the National Wealth Fund, freeing the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation from the obligation to publish data on the state of these funds. Such an order, as reported by the online publication Gazeta.ru, will be valid until February 1, 2012. In addition, until January 1, 2013, the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation is no longer required to publish data on the receipt and expenditure of oil and gas budget revenues and their transfer to these funds. The text of the decree of the Government of the Russian Federation of April 21, 2010 explains this measure simply. This decision is due to the fact that the replenishment of the Reserve Fund and the National Welfare Fund is not provided for before the indicated dates. In other words, this is due to the fact that the country's budget in these years is planned to be in deficit, and therefore all excess oil and gas revenues that previously replenished the funds will now go only to the federal treasury. Financial analysts rated this news negatively. According to the chief economist of the management company Rus Capital, Alexei Logvin, now one can only guess about the state of the funds, and with this approach, the suspicion inevitably arises that something not quite favorable is happening, which is better not to report. Mikhail Armyakov, head of the analytical department at Sovlink LLC, draws attention to the fact that the decision followed a series of meetings with investors as part of the placement of new issues of Russian sovereign Eurobonds. It seems that investors have asked some unpleasant questions about these funds, which caused the desire of the Russian leadership to close information on them, the expert suspects. Such closeness, in his opinion, is not compatible with the goal of turning Moscow into a world financial center. This does not go well with the course declared by the President of the Russian Federation Dmitry Medvedev towards openness and further democratization of modern Russia. Sabotage, perhaps this is how briefly you can define how the Russian bureaucracy at all levels carries out the instructions of the President of the Russian Federation Dmitry Medvedev. A previously cited article in the German magazine Der Spiegel sums up the dismal result of 2 years of liberalization efforts by Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. After the death of several detainees in Russian prisons, the president issued a law on the humanization of the penitentiary system. He also attempted to reform the corrupt Ministry of the Interior, but his efforts were quickly thwarted as the police chiefs he fired simply reappeared in higher positions, at the behest of the government. This state of affairs, as one might assume, does not really satisfy the President of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev. It is this dissatisfaction that can explain the event, which did not go unnoticed by many attentive observers. In the last days of May 2010, a meeting of the Presidium of the State Council of the Russian Federation was held at the southwestern water station in Nikovo near Moscow. The high meeting discussed the problems of ecology and ways to solve them. The speech, among other things, touched upon the ecological situation on Lake Baikal. During his speech, the President of Russia recalled that at the level of the head of state, ecology has been discussed since 2003, but all instructions, if they are carried out, are only partially. After that, he harshly and succinctly stated that, for 7 years they have not done a damn thing. Reporting on the event, the Reuters news agency noted that Dmitry Medvedev rarely criticizes the decisions of his predecessor, but on May 27, 2010, he allowed himself to do so. On June 21, 2010, according to the Vedomosti newspaper, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev held a meeting on the execution of presidential instructions and demanded that those government officials who do not meet the deadline be identified and punished. We need to make a decision in the near future and provide a list indicating those who are guilty of violating the deadlines for fulfilling instructions, Dmitry Medvedev said, adding that the guilty face serious punishment up to and including dismissal. Who and what punishments ultimately suffered should also be indicated in the list, the president emphasized. The current bureaucratic system is so cumbersome that it is not clear who exactly to punish, said Pavel Kadyukin, associate professor at the Faculty of State and Municipal Administration of the State University Higher School of Economics. Commenting on the meeting held by Dmitry Medvedev to the Vedomosti newspaper, Pavel Mihailovich reasonably noted that the president gives the instruction to the prime minister, then it goes down to the deputy prime minister in charge of the issue, and down to the direct executor. And it is often not clear at what level the order is stuck. According to Pavel Kadyukin, this is a problem for both the current president and the previous one. And if the list does appear, then basically it will contain quite random people who have long been tried to be fired, but were waiting for a reason. Another commentator of the Vedomosti newspaper, Konstantin Chichenko, head of the control department of the President of the Russian Federation, in the rank of assistant to the President of the Russian Federation, noted with some optimism that since the beginning of 2010, the execution of presidential instructions on time has increased by as much as 68%. But the general level of diligence, as involuntarily clear from the commentary of the official Chichenko, is monstrously low. Only every fifth order is executed. It seems that in reality the percentage of execution is even lower, given that many of these 20% of instructions, as is often the case in practice, are executed only on paper. Let's think. If in 2010, according to the Kremlin official, only 20% of the orders of the President of the Russian Federation were executed, growth in 2010, as was said, was 68%, then what was the percentage of execution before that? The answer is simple, no more than 12%. In reality, taking into account the bureaucratic dogmatism, we believe that this figure was even more modest, namely 5 to 6%. In essence, this is a bureaucratic and managerial collapse. And this collapse came after numerous administrative reforms carried out throughout the 2000s by Vladimir Putin and his associates, who urged everyone to believe only in deeds. It turns out that the senior tandemocrat Vladimir Putin, who headed the government of the Russian Federation, is directly responsible for the fact that in the first years of his tenure as Prime Minister, the instructions of the President, the highest official of the state power of the Russian Federation, were not actually executed. On May 7, 2008, Dmitry Medvedev signed one of his first decrees. It was Decree number 714, on providing housing for veterans of the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945. According to this decree, veterans of the war without housing were to be provided with it in 2010 to 2011, and the bulk of the work had to be completed by the 65th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, that is, by May 9, 2010. On May 4, 2010, the Minister of Regional Development of the Russian Federation Viktor Basargin stated, "The presidential decree on providing veterans who need better housing conditions with apartments has been fully implemented." Is this really so? Of course not. Even in Moscow, until now, by the summer of 2011, about 50 frontline soldiers have not received the keys to new apartments. What can we say about the province? In the issue of the weekly Our Version, which was published on May 17, 2010, Igor Dmitriev's article, "The Last Fight of a Veteran," was published. The subtitle of the article eloquently described the situation that had developed on the anniversary of the Great Victory with the elimination of the veteran queue, rewarding free housing for war participants resulted in another window dressing. The scale of this window dressing, according to the newspaper, is as follows. According to the minister, to date, 28,494 veterans have celebrated their housewarming. At the same time, in May 2008, when it was decided to liquidate the Veterans Line, there were 55,000 people in it. Moreover, by May 4, it had increased to 84.3 thousand. As Basargin clarifies, only those veterans who joined the housing queue before March 1, 2005 were provided with apartments. With all the rest, the minister promised to resolve the issue by the end of 2010, for which an additional 40.1 billion rubles were allocated from the federal budget to the regions. But if we take into account that over the previous 2 years the authorities have solved the housing problems for only 28.5 thousand veterans, then at the current pace, it will take at least 3 more years to solve the housing problem of all frontline soldiers. It is easy to calculate that only a quarter of the veterans standing in the housing queue received apartments. And successfully going through all the bureaucratic circles of hell and collecting a bunch of certificates in order to be on the coveted list is a feat that not every veteran can do. The officials did their best to reduce the number of applicants. What other comments are needed here? Chapter 6. The third is not superfluous. In the book of Boris Mazo, already mentioned by us, St. Petersburg against Moscow, or Who is Who surrounded by V.V. Putin, published in 2003, there are very interesting lines characterizing Putin's future successor as President of Russia. Dmitry Medvedev is considered to be one of the most unexposed and little-known members of Putin's inner circle. Apparently, due to lack of information, he is called the staff guru. Exactly the same words can now be applied to Vyacheslav Volodin. His appointment to the post of Chief of Staff of the Government of the Russian Federation with the rank of Vice Premier, which took place on October 21, 2010, caused some confusion among the political elite of the country. Before that, Volodin, better known precisely as a politician and high-ranking party functionary of United Russia, had never worked in executive bodies of state power of the Russian Federation, especially in the government of the Russian Federation. Vyacheslav Volodin, who was exclusively engaged in parliamentary activities and party building of United Russia, was not in demand by the White House when Vladimir Putin moved there in March 2008. But he suddenly turned out to be needed, and not just needed, but in the key post of head of the Cabinet of Ministers, when the time came for the ruling tandem to decide on its political future. Recall that the first appointment of Dmitry Medvedev in the Kremlin was precisely the position of Deputy Chief of Staff of the Government of the Russian Federation, which he took on November 9, 1999, when Vladimir Putin was Prime Minister. Volodin, whose qualities Putin had plenty of time to evaluate, was immediately appointed to a higher level, which indicates a high degree of Vladimir Vladimirovich's confidence in his new counterpart. Now Volodin not only holds in his hands all the levers of the internal personnel policy of the Cabinet of Ministers and places the people he needs in fundamentally significant positions in the structure of the government of the Russian Federation, but also heads the organizational headquarters of Putin's All-Russian People's Front. It is he who now secretly performs the functions of the head of the campaign headquarters of VV Putin, whose desire to become president of Russia again, few doubt. According to the analysts of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, who compiled the rating of 100 leading politicians of Russia, in May 2011, Vyacheslav Volodin was already in sixth place in terms of the degree of his political influence, ahead of such weighty figures from among the St. Petersburg as Sergei Naryshkin, Igor Shivalov, Sergei Ivanov or Dmitry Kozak, although back in April he was in 12th position. We are not talking about the fact that according to the results of 2007, after Dmitry Medvedev's candidacy for the presidency, Vyacheslav Volodin occupied only the 51st line, not at all being included in the list of persons who at that time had a strong influence on political processes in country. Now Volodin, as a public politician, with the exception of Putin and Medvedev, is second only to Kudrin, Sekin and Surkov, figures who, due to known circumstances, have always played the role of grey cardinals, and who are unlikely to go out of their roles. Which, in turn, puts Vyacheslav Viktorovich on a par with the most likely contenders for the post of President of Russia, if, of course, the ruling tandem, having settled all their contradictions, decides to play this card. At a minimum, Vyacheslav Volodin is a ready prime minister if Vladimir Putin takes the presidency again in 2012. In any case, it cannot be ruled out that after some time, analysts will have to state such a political phenomenon as the Saratov ones, which, having entered into an alliance with the Moscow ones, will slowly begin to push out the St. Petersburg ones. At least some examples of manifestation of this process in Moscow have already been observed since last year. But what do we know about Vyacheslav Volodin? The book is a source of knowledge. In fact, Vyacheslav Volodin is almost the only representative of the Putin team who made his political career largely due to his own qualities, both deserving of respect and contempt. Having started a rapid ascent up the career ladder even under Soviet rule, he successfully continued to overcome new heights under Yeltsin, and then, under Putin. I trampled a little under Medvedev, and, again climbed up. It would be wrong to say that he never experienced disgrace or made mistakes. This happened too. But at the same time, he always found a way out of an unpleasant situation and then not only returned to his original position, but also rose higher. Quoting Andrei Makarevich, we can say, we remember how it all began. Having started his political career early thanks to his successful marriage to the daughter of one very influential secretary of the CPSU District Committee in the Saratov region, Vyacheslav Volodin, almost until the age of 30, had complexes not so much about his fleeting, but very productive career membership in the Communist Party, but about his young age, trying to appear older and more solid in public. It was later, after 40, that he would begin to look younger, already complexing about his bald patches and tummy, and then, in the first half of the 1990s, he grew, as it seemed to him, a magnificent mustache and, bulging his eyes, terribly puffed them up when he was angry with his subordinates, causing them not so much awe as obsequious tenderness. As he frowns his eyebrows, as he stomps his foot, he takes the visitor dumbfounded. Political analyst Pyotr Krasilnikov liked to repeat, ironically, over the external model of behavior of the 30-year-old vice speaker of the Saratov Regional Duma Vyacheslav Volodin over a beer. Of all those who were then part of the inner circle of Vyacheslav Volodin, perhaps only Nikolai Pankov, at that time the head of the secretariat of the deputy chairman of the Saratov Regional Duma VV Volodin, understood all the cheap pretense of such a formidable appearance of his boss. Being 1 year younger than Volodin and knowing him since his student days, Nikolai Pankov always treated his boss not only with emphasis, but even with some kind of masochistic reverence, being an example of an impeccable apparatchik, which was, for example, General Poskrebyshev under Generalissimo Stalin. Thanks to this quality, in fact, he achieved everything that a rural tractor driver can only dream of. Now N.V. Pankov is a member of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation from United Russia, Deputy Chairman of the Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation on Constitutional Legislation and State Building, a member of the Presidium of the General Council of the United Russia Runner-Up Party, and, which Nikolai Vasilyevich himself has no doubts about. Without 5 minutes as governor of some subsidized region in the European part of the Russian Federation. And then, in 1994, Nikolai Pankov had to do any, even the most petty, work that his boss would not point out to him. For example, to reprint all the biographies of candidates for deputies of the Saratov Regional Duma of the first convocation, all their election programs and campaigns, to add to this the official results of the elections, providing them with schedules for the distribution of votes of voters, to compile all the collected material and supplement it with several legal acts of the Saratov region, so that later pass all this off as a 364-page scientific monograph, Saratov Regional Duma. Organizational and Legal Foundations of Formation, published under the authorship of V.V. Volodin and edited by Professor V.V. Volodin. This masterpiece work was printed at the very end of 1994 in a circulation of 500 copies and in January 1995 was already lying in all the kiosks of Rosbashat as some kind of bestseller. Actually, it became such after 15 years for inquisitive researchers of the latest political history of Russia. But not because of its content, which even then caused only laughter, but because of the unique composition of the publishing team that prepared this publication for publication. Formally, on the title page of this monograph, the publishing and printing enterprise, Gazeta, was indicated, but among the employees of this publishing house who prepared the book, N.V. Pankov, and I.V. Lobanov, who at that time was an assistant to the deputy of the Saratov Regional Duma V.V. Volodin and literally did not get out of the secretariat of his boss. 20-year-old Vanya Lobanov was actually on errands with Volodin, and often even with Pankov, give this, bring it, go to, don't interfere. Patiently enduring the hardships of the nomenklatura service, the proofreader, Ivan Lobanov, quickly reached political heights. Already a member of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation from United Russia, Deputy Chairman of the Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation on Civil, Criminal, Arbitration and Procedural Legislation, a member of the Presidium of the General Council of the EFP United Russia, he, at the request of Volodin, will be appointed on June 21, 2010 to the post of Deputy Minister of Education and Science of the Russian Federation in the rank of Secretary of State, and then, on January 28, 2011, Director of the Department of Civil Service and Personnel of the Government of the Russian Federation. Now in this imposing bumpkin one does not recognize that nimble, muzzled kid who, like an electric broom, flew around the Volodinsky reception from morning to night. But this historical book is significant not only for the figures of the technical editor and proofreader who worked tirelessly on it. The circle of reviewers who agreed to sacrifice their public authority in order to confirm the scientific significance of this dubious work was also very indicative. Among those, for example, was Yegor Gaidar's ally, co-chairman of the ROPD, Choice of Russia, Valery Davidov, who later, when Ietskov and Volodin become the masters of the Saratov region, will receive the post of head of the regional branch of the pension fund of the Russian Federation, but then enter into conflict with them and die in his company car after severe poisoning. Another reviewer, the secretary of the National Committee of the Democratic Party of Russia, 30-year-old Oleg Karpov, after Yatskov and Volodin, standing at the helm of the province, cleared the entire political field for themselves, will be out of work, and a year later he will die in his own apartment from the inflicted him numerous stab wounds. And the third reviewer, who, like Volodin, held the post of deputy chairman of the Saratov Regional Duma, the secretary of the Saratov Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, Valery Rashkin, after the establishment of the dictatorship of law in the Saratov region, in a Yatskovian way, will move into tough opposition both to the governor Yatskov himself and to his first deputy, Volodin. However, what may be hidden behind the outer side of Rashkin's opposition will be discussed below. Now Valery Rashkin is a deputy of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation from the Communist Party, deputy chairman of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, and the irreconcilable enemy, Vyacheslav Volodin. But then, in 1994, all three were openly on friendly terms with Professor Volodin, and willingly agreed that their names be used as convincing evidence of the weight of this scientific work. By the way, when Professor V.V. Volodin edited this work, the author of the monograph himself is V.V. Volodin, who, as you may have guessed, is the same person with the professor, was listed as a student of the Russian Academy of Public Administration, RAGS, because behind Vyacheslav Viktorovich there was only the Saratov Institute of Agricultural Mechanization, SMSH, M.I. Kalinin, which, however, did not prevent him from successfully managing the Department of State Building and Management at the Volga Region Academy of Public Administration, PAGS, at the time of writing the book. By the way, until recently, Vyacheslav Volodin was a professor at the Department of Constitutional Law at the Volga Region Civil Service Academy, now named after P.A. Stolypin, and part-time headed the Department of State Construction at Moscow State University. M.V. Lomonosov. 50 years later, historians of Russian science and education will finally get confused in the intricacies of V.V. Volodin, without understanding how it is possible to be a professor of the PAGS and a student of the RAGS at the same time. They will not understand how, having received a PhD in technical sciences at SMSH, they can then defend a doctoral dissertation in jurisprudence at the St. Petersburg Institute of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, where, we recall, Sobchak also taught. Although for this there is no need to go to the northern capital, Saratov has its own nursery of lawyers. But to become a doctor of jurisprudence in just a year after receiving a law degree is possible, probably, only in St. Petersburg. However, a member of the Presidium of the Higher Attestation Commission of the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, V.V. Volodin, probably knew better. In place of Fursenko or Sadovniki, in the spring of 2009, a multi-way combination was played against Vyacheslav Volodin, which almost led to the end of his career as a federal politician. This story, which never became public, was a serious test of strength for the shadow tandem. What exactly are we talking about? The post of Secretary of the Presidium of the General Council of the United Russia WFP, which Volodin held at that time, is an elected party position. By that time, Vyacheslav Viktorovich had been in this position for the second consecutive term, so personnel rotation was to follow soon, provided for by the Charter of United Russia and other party documents. Among other employment options for Vyacheslav Volodin, such possible vacancies as the position of the Minister of Education and Science of the Russian Federation and the chair of the rector of Moscow State University named after M.V. Lomonosov. Both options had a very real basis. Which one, we will analyze in order. As for the first chair, V.V. Volodin in the development of higher education in modern Russia is difficult to deny, knowing how much effort he put into opening new educational institutions and modernizing existing ones as part of the implementation of social projects of the United Russia Party. In addition, the figure of the current minister A.A. Fursenko, mainly because of the scandal around the unified state examination, even then caused irritation in the public environment, whose voice both the president and the prime minister still had to listen to. Therefore, the replacement of Andrei Alexandrovich with Vyacheslav Viktorovich was seen as a very likely personnel appointment. Moreover, the relevance of this issue, apparently, remained until October 2010, until Vyacheslav Volodin was appointed to the post of Deputy Prime Minister by presidential decree. An indirect proof of this conclusion is the fact that on June 21, 2010, Volodin's protégé, a 36-year-old Saratov resident, deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, member of the Presidium of the General Council of the United Russia Party, I.V. Lobanov, received the post of Deputy Minister of Education and Science of the Russian Federation in the rank of Secretary of State. Many observers then noted that Ivan Vasilyevich changed his profession in order to prepare this ministry for the arrival of his boss. Of course, Fursenko himself could not help but guess about this, for whom the presence of the Volodinsky spy at his side, who, moreover, did not have a classical university education, did not bring much joy. Later, when Putin and Medvedev finally decide on the political future of Volodin, Vyacheslav Viktorovich, having received new powers, will drag Ivan Vasilyevich to the White House. As mentioned above, on January 28, 2011, I.V. Lobanov will be appointed Director of the Department of Civil Service and Personnel of the Government of the Russian Federation. Having secured this key position for his nominee, Vyacheslav Volodin received at his disposal the main administrative resource for him, which makes it possible for him to influence personnel appointments in all ministries and departments. Now, about the second chair, which also shown Volodin 2 years ago. The current rector of Moscow State University V.A. Sadovniky turned 70 on April 3, 2009, which meant that he had crossed the age limit allowed by the Charter of Moscow State University for a person holding the highest position at the university. Despite the fact that the term of Viktor Antonovich's rectorship expired only on November 18, 2010, there were interested forces who decided to elect a new rector in the spring, but, for a reason that was not clear at that time, the noisy campaign to replace Sadovniky was postponed to autumn. Plus, in the spring of 2009 around Moscow State University, Lomonosov, the so-called rating scandal, broke out, in which the rector Sadovniky took a defensive position, which pretty much tarnished both the reputation of the university itself and his own. Now it becomes clear, if Volodin's career had not worked out in the White House, in November 2010 there would have been a different rector at Moscow State University. But both Volodin and Sadovniky were very lucky. No less fortunate was the university itself, which continued to be led by at least a recognized scientist. It should be recalled that on the eve of the events described above, namely at the end of February 2009, within the walls of Moscow State University, at the Faculty of Political Science, not without an indication from above, a new subdivision was created, the Department of State Construction, which was headed by Professor V.V. Volodin, and persistent rumors spread among the members of the Academic Council of Moscow State University that Vyacheslav Viktorovich would be strongly recommended as a new rector. The old Moscow professors, who had grumbled, were supposedly reassured only by the explanation that Volodin, they say, would briefly linger in the chair of the rector of Moscow State University. It would simply be more convenient for him to start from Sparrow Hills as a candidate for the post of the capital's mayor, as soon as the question of replacing Yuri Luzhkov was raised edge in the Kremlin. But to make of Volodin a certain symbol of the Moscow intelligentsia, for example, G.K.H. Popov in the late 1980s, did not dare. Apparently, not only the metropolitan nomenclatura, for whom Volodin always remained a stranger, even during the years of work with Luzhkov and Primakov, when he was engaged in the creation of the Fatherland All Russia movement, rebelled against this project, but also the Petersburg group of Putin's conscription, for many of whom Vyacheslav Viktorovich, who is rapidly walking up the career ladder, still poses a hidden threat, and not only as a bright, outstanding personality, but this was only the beginning of a whole series of troubles that began to haunt Vyacheslav Volodin in 2009. Islamic Factor, Mirzikhanov, Surkov and Kadyrov. In mid-May 2009, a 3-hour meeting of D.A. Medvedev with the leaders of the Communist Party faction in the State Duma. Among the invited persons there were more than 10 deputies, each of whom had the right to ask the president only 3 questions. The secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation for Organizational Work, the first secretary of the Saratov Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation V.F. Rashkin, who voiced to Medvedev, with the consent of the latter, not 3, but 4 questions, including the question of the reaction of the country's top leadership to the results of a comprehensive audit conducted within the walls of the SSU. N.G. Chernyshevsky. As convincing evidence of the violations and abuses revealed during this audit on the part of the leadership of Saratov State University, a thick folder with materials from the accounts chamber of the Russian Federation and the Prosecutor General's office of the Russian Federation was placed on the president's desk. It became clear to the interlocutors that, in addition to SSU Rector L.Yu Kosovich, a certain share of responsibility for the entire negative background associated with Saratov University should also be assigned to the chairman of the SSU Board of Trustees V.V. Volodin. Many people in Saratov knew that such a folder existed, and that the materials in it were only multiplying. As they also knew that Rashkin repeatedly addressed the Prosecutor General's office of the Russian Federation with a deputy's request, from which he did not always receive only replies. But no one believed that this information would reach the president, and from hand to hand. However, as Dmitry Bylan sings, I believe that the impossible is possible. In addition to this circumstance, at the most tense strategic moment for Volodin, a sophisticated act of Caucasian revenge followed from the longtime opponent of Rector Kosovich, the dean of the Faculty of History of SSU V.S. Mirzikhanov, who, as some experts in the Caucasus assure, even though he comes from Dagestan, but belongs to the Kadyrov clan Teep, which explains the amazing political vitality of Velikan Salmankanovich in the conditions of the unprecedented information war unleashed against him in recent years. It was even said that Professor Mirzikhanov directly addressed the president of the Chechen Republic R.A. Kadyrov, telling him about the persecution of representatives of the Caucasus, which allegedly took place within the walls of Saratov University. As knowledgeable people assured, Mirzikhanov's appeal also contained quotations from the speeches of the fiery Tribune of United Russia, a member of the public chamber of the Russian Federation, vice-rector of SSU D.V. Chernyshevsky, a distant descendant of the Revolutionary Democrat, after whom the university is named. Dmitry Chernyshevsky allegedly made a number of politically incorrect statements about the children of the mountains. And the conclusion from this letter, presumably, was 1. Patronage from Vyacheslav Volodin negatively affects the interethnic climate throughout the region. Plus, the political opponents of Vyacheslav Viktorovich added an Islamic factor to the fire of the flared-up conflict, trying to push the foreheads of the Vice Speaker of the State Duma of the Russian Federation V.V. Volodin and the head of the Spiritual Administration of Muslims of the Volga region, Imam Muktasib M.A. Bybarsov, whose second wife, as they say in the local Tatar diaspora, is a Chechen by nationality. The fact is that Mukatas Abasovich's confidants, together with Mirzikhanov, already in 2003 started the creation of the Saratov regional branch of the OOD Muslims of Russia, which began to play a significant role in the political life of the entire region and has already managed to distinguish itself by holding a number of public events that have resonated in Islamic the world. Local journalists were never able to find out which Teep Bybarsov's wife came from, but it cannot be ruled out that she is also related to the Kadyrov clan. At the very least, the negativity towards Vyacheslav Volodin that was accumulated and presented in a concentrated form by the brothers in faith to the president of Chechnya was enough for the planned visit of Ramzan Kadyrov to the Saratov region, which some local media had already managed to report, was cancelled without explanation. The resentment, for one's own, turned out to be even stronger than the business interests associated with the Saratov oil refinery, to the pipe of which Lechi Altimurov, Beard, approached, not in vain, when he visited Saratov incognito in the mid-1990s to conduct business negotiations on this issue with a local political adventurer, a retired FSK officer Sergei Ilatiev, who died of wounds and illnesses after an assassination attempt on him in July 2006. In the end, as the Moscow apparatchiks assured, it was Ramzan Kadyrov himself who directly turned to the first deputy head of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation V.Yu Surkov with a demand to sort out the received alarm signals about the position taken by Volodin. After that, an unadvertised meeting between Vladislav Yurevich and Vyacheslav Viktorovich took place, at which a very serious suggestion was allegedly made to the latter. It should be noted in this regard that the father of Vladislav Surkov, a Chechen by nationality, belonged, as they say, to Dudiev's Teep, with whom the Kadyrovites still have warm relations, so Vladislav Yurevich's concern could be understood. Then they said that Surkov gave Volodin 3 months to think, after which Vyacheslav Viktorovich had to finally decide on his future career. It was completely clear that neither Fursenko's chair, nor Sadovnicky's chair, nor, even more so, The chair of the mayor of Moscow, along the streets of which the Vainak rally then passed, in this situation, Volodin did not shine. At best, it could have been the chair of the governor of the Saratov region, where Vyacheslav Viktorovich would have had to build relations with Muslims practically from scratch. Unless, of course, the Muslims themselves would not oppose this appointment. Later, when this conflict between Volodin and Surkov was settled, those who were at the forefront of the political confrontation turned out to be extreme. Velikin Mirzikhanov, who had been suing Kosovich for several years for his right to be the dean of the history department of the SSU, in 2010 left the walls of his native university and moved to Moscow, where he now teaches at the department of the Russian State University for the Humanities. Dmitry Chernyshevsky first resigned from the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation, and then, in December 2010, he lost his post as vice-rector for public relations at SSU. The conflict, if it was reflected, was only for the better. But the relationship between Rashkin and Volodin is, as they say, a separate song, and they will be discussed below. The story of the compromising evidence on Volodin once again demonstrated how strong, on the one hand, and on the other hand, contradictory, the shadow tandem of Russian politics represented by Surkov and Volodin. The significance of this tandem, as a separate structure, nurtured in the shadow of the publicity of the main tandemocrats of Russia, Putin and Medvedev, in the context of the 2012 elections, is practically not taken into account by political analysts and other experts wondering about the fate of the country. But in vain. His today's underestimation will again come back to haunt many surprises that will baffle those who treated this subject as not worthy of attention. Sworn friends, Volodin and Rashkin. It is possible that in fact the initiator of the appointment of the secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, the first secretary of the Saratov Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the deputy of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation V.F. Rashkin for the post of first secretary of the Moscow City Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is the head of the apparatus of the government of the Russian Federation in the rank of Deputy Prime Minister V.V. Volodin, who coordinated this party and personnel issue with the first deputy head of the administration of the President of the Russian Federation V.Y.U. Surkov. At least, this is being talked about more and more loudly on the sidelines of the Central Committee of the party. Recall that Vyacheslav Volodin received his new appointment to the government of the Russian Federation on October 21, 2010, and on December 18, 2010, Valery Rashkin was elected first secretary of the CPRF-MGK. These two events were preceded by a number of circumstances related to the choice of a strategy for the development of the Russian political system on the eve of the elections to the State Duma and the President of the Russian Federation. And if in the camp of President D.A. Medvedev, V.Y.U. is responsible for this direction, Surkov, then in the camp of Prime Minister V.V. Putin, namely V.V. Volodin. Both of them, in principle, rely on the same intellectual base formed by the expert community. Of course, we are not talking about the so-called discussion clubs of United Russia, which have shown their complete unsuitability both in Moscow and in the field. We will not now delve into the algorithms of these scenarios in detail. This is the subject of a separate and very detailed discussion. One thing is clear: if the country's top leadership abandons the inertial path of development of the Russian political system, then regardless of whose roadmap is taken as a basis, INZR or, say, the CSR, the role of the political opposition in the upcoming transformations becomes one of the key success factors for Russia's entire strategy to get out of the impasse. And if so, in the opinion of Putin and his entourage, then right now it is necessary to carry out the necessary personnel rotation in order to ensure the manageability of the reset of democracy, and use this resource as their own instrument of political influence, including on Medvedev. It is quite clear that in this case, the Putin team would like to see as leaders of the opposition parties, which will be represented in the next composition of the State Duma, people who are not only adequate, but also constructively thinking, that is, ready to make a political deal with the top leadership countries. Which, in turn, implies a special degree of personal trust. Of course, this approach has nothing to do with the real modernization of the political system, but that is not what we are talking about now. Many analysts have long pointed to the need to replace the leader of the Communist Party, which has lost its role as the vanguard of the radical opposition, which has resulted in the marginalization of protests that have recently become uncontrollable, like on Manasnaya Square. June 26, 2011. Chairman of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation G.A. Zhuganov is already 67 years old. Given his venerable age, it would be naive to believe that grandfather Gina can become a recognized leader of the protest masses, who have become much younger in recent years, as indicated by the March measurements of the FOM and the Levada Center. Gennady Zhuganov has been ruling the Communist Party since 1993, when he headed the Presidium of the Central Executive Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, that is, as much as the unforgettable Elie Brezhnev. Therefore, the role prepared for him by the honorary chairman of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation with the sovereign and relatively young Secretary General will not look like something out of the ordinary. Anticipating such a turn of events, Gennady Andreevich, after conducting the necessary consultations with Vladislav Yurevich, began to prepare ahead of time for his successor. Such, with the easy filing of Volodin, who could always agree with Surkov, and, apparently, became Valery Rashkin. Against the background of the decrepit Papa Zayu, who has long turned into grandfather Gina, the rock climber and baseball player Valery Rashkin, even at 56 years old, looks much more preferable, especially in the eyes of young radicals who fanate for Spartak and throw Christmas tree decorations at the cops. Once Vyacheslav Viktorovich already helped Valery Fedorovich in his rapid ascent through the party ladder, neutralizing the former fiery tribune of the Saratov Communists, A.N. Gordeev, who compromised himself before the Central Committee and was forced, having lost the next elections to the State Duma, to leave public politics forever. Volodin and Rashkin closely converged back in 1990, when both were elected deputies of the Saratov City Council of People's Deputies and were in the same faction of communists. In May 1994, they were both elected deputies of the Saratov Regional Duma of the First Convocation and became its vice-speakers. Their offices were located side by side on the third floor of the Regional Duma building. They were always on you, they always found a common language, although they had to play completely different political roles. Therefore, there is nothing surprising in the fact that since December 1999, both Volodin and Rashkin have been invariably elected deputies of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, never intersecting in the same single-mandate constituency, and then, after the abolition of the majority proportional system, heading the regional lists different, but equally passing electoral associations or political parties. Both lead a healthy lifestyle, both became doctors of sciences. In short, a friendship that can only be envied. And as for accusatory rhetoric, designed to inspire their electorate, each of them copes with this task simply brilliantly, sometimes arranging ostentatious skirmishes or real trials. With the political growth of Vyacheslav Volodin, the positions of Valery Rashkin also strengthened. In 2003, the first becomes deputy chairman of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, and the second, a member of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. In 2004, Valery Rashkin became the secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation for organizational and personnel work, heading the organizational department of the Central Committee. In 2005, Vyacheslav Volodin received the post of secretary of the Presidium of the General Council of the United Russia WFP. Each of them begins, in fact, to lead the entire party building, only one, in the Communist Party, and the other, in the TR. Each of them begins to purge the party ranks, strengthening their position and demonstrating to the higher political leadership their own indispensability. Volodin swept through the country like a whirlwind, sorting the party members into comrades in arms, supporters, and fellow travelers. Rashkin, rolling up his sleeves, smashes the city committees in St. Petersburg, the Urals, and then in Moscow that do not agree with the general line of the party. Each of them, in fact, operates by Bolshevik methods, although under the guise of different party ideologies. However, it would be wrong to assume that idyllic relations have always been maintained within this tandem. The old rivalry made itself felt, although the eldest, Valery Rashkin, resigned himself to the role of a follower. The situation was complicated by the fact that Rashkin never financially depended on Volodin and the fulfillment of his deputy obligations to the long-term sponsor of the Saratov Communists, the president of PKF Aztecs OJSCAN Yaroslavov, known in certain circles as the Professor, sometimes came into conflict with the political and economic interests of the Volodin group, which always provoked a conflict of the parties, accompanied by stormy party rhetoric. And even the attempts made by Volodin's right-hand, State Duma deputy N.V. Pankov. But now, when the future of the country's political system is at stake, none of the top officials of the state will stand on ceremony with either Rashkin or Yaroslavov. The blow followed immediately in two directions: political, to weaken the electoral base of the Communist Party, and economic, to deprive Rashkin of financial support from Yaroslavov. It is understandable, the future leader of the leading opposition party should depend only on the Kremlin, regardless of who will be in charge in this Kremlin. And, no tales in the troubled Saratov waters. If everything is quite clear and understandable with the first, political, direction of the blow, the withdrawal of the patriots of Russia to the electoral field, then only a few guess about the economic blow. What is this about? The basis of the economic, and hence the financial power of the PKF Aztecs in Saratov are the department store TD Central, which houses an indoor market, and the shopping complex Children's World, since neither crushed stone quarries, nor a building materials plant, nor a house building the plant, not even the profitable printing house, Pavelzaya Polygraphy, owned by Yaroslavov and his comrades, do not give such tangible profits as renting out retail space. But the whole problem lies in the fact that at one time both of these buildings, the Central Department Store and Detskaya Mir, were pledged against the security of a large bank loan necessary for business development. And everything would be fine if from Moscow, through the Federal Property Management Agency, an instruction had not been issued to review the results of privatization in relation to these so profitable objects. To make a forecast for the further development of events, one does not have to be a visionary. If the arbitration court satisfies the claims of the Federal Property Management Agency, PKF Aztecs OJSC will lose the fattest piece of its property, and the creditor bank, having learned about the nullity of the collateral, will demand immediate payment of the full amount of the loan with all interest on it and a penalty, which in the end will inevitably lead to the bankruptcy of the entire Yaroslavov holding. Of course, after such an apocalypse, the Saratov communists, left without financial support, will only be able to rely on the goodwill of another sponsor of the protest moods, an influential businessman S.G. Kurikin, who is in a trusting relationship with V.V. Volodin and N.V. Pankov, but Valery Fedorovich, who will gain financial independence, will only have to obey the political logic of Vyacheslav Viktorovich, unless, of course, Rashkin does not mind leading the Communist Party. So far, in May 2011, the Arbitration Court of First Instance did not see any grounds for cancelling the privatization of the Centralny trading house in Saratov. But it is far from a fact that this decision will not be challenged in an appeal arbitration, after which events will begin to unfold according to the scenario outlined above. Here is such a Byzantine alignment is obtained. Black PR in Volodinsky. Now almost no one doubts that Vyacheslav Volodin, even after his high appointment to the government of the Russian Federation, continues to be the chief political strategist of the Party of Power, which, under his strict leadership, is gradually transforming into a political syndicate called the All-Russian People's Front. Like no one among those who know Volodin well, there is no doubt that Vyacheslav Viktorovich will begin to use in his political work those techniques and methods that he masterfully mastered, building a huge colossus of propaganda and counter-propaganda of United Russia. Often, in the arsenal of PR tools that Volodin and his subordinates actively used, there were such tricks and methods that the external and internal enemies of the Party of Power literally fell out after they became targets of an information attack, in Volodin's way. What do we mean by this? On February 4, 2010, when the entire party elite of United Russia widely celebrated the birthday of V.V. Volodin, Secretary General of the ruling party, a press conference was held in Saratov by a group of political technologists who were engaged in black PR on the instructions of N.V. Pankov, the right hand of the birthday man. Were among the heroes of the day and the authors of this book. Let us draw your attention to the fact that by political technologists, we mean those people who, on a professional basis, are engaged in the widest range of political manipulations, and not just electoral processes. In this regard, our point of view on this subject completely coincides with the position of the famous Russian election manager C.at. Tarakhanova. But, back to the topic of our conversation. So, the past 3-hour press conference produced the effect of an exploding bomb. Almost all the leading news agencies gave detailed reports about this extraordinary event, such sharks of the air as the BBC, Voice of America, Deutsche Welle, Radio Liberty, and Echo of Moscow, and in the final news release of the Week with Mariana Maximovskaya, on REN-TV, the participants in this press conference, along with Putin and Medvedev, became the heroes of the title TV report. Of course, on the same day, State Duma Deputy Nikolai Pankov and a number of other prominent United Russia spoke in the media with an official refutation of the facts and circumstances presented at this press conference. The opposition, especially the systemic one, rejoiced. The leaders of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the Liberal Democratic Party and A Just Russia readily distributed their comments, stigmatizing the bears seized by the paw and demanding that the country's top leadership and law enforcement agencies call Volodin and his accomplices to account. The next day, a press conference, organized by United Russia itself, followed, at which the ideologists of the Party of Power either accused the repentant black PR people of venality or hinted at mental deviations in their behavior. In a word, the party functionaries of United Russia turned out to be completely unprepared for the emergence of this kind of force majeure, and simply did not know what to do in the situation that had arisen. Only then, having recovered a little, did they launch a counterattack on all information fronts and launched a moloch of prosecution of the slanderers. Vyacheslav Volodin himself skillfully distanced himself from the war zone and shifted all responsibility for what happened to his subordinates. What exactly did the participants in this scandalous press conference say, which not only overshadowed the celebration of the name day of the General Secretary, but also led to the resignation of a number of PR specialists and political strategists of United Russia? Briefly retell the essence of what was discussed. The participants of the press conference told the whole truth about what PR specialists and political technologists of United Russia are actually doing in Saratov. They talked about what constitutes black PR of the party in power, about what techniques and methods the PR specialists of the Saratov regional branch of United Russia used in the fight against external and internal enemies of the party. In 2008, when they just started working in the team of Nikolai Pankov, they were told about the high trust that the party had. They were told about a special mission they had to fulfill. It seemed to them that their professionalism, their journalistic skills, their experience were needed by the Party of Power in order to restore order in the Saratov region, to make life better, so that law and justice would triumph. But very soon they found out otherwise. In fact, Nikolai Pankov's Sonder team was formed from them, which destroyed the good name and reputation of those people who were declared personal enemies of the leader of the Saratov United Russia, Vyacheslav Volodin. Nothing to do with the interests of the party as such, not to mention the interests of the Saratov region and its inhabitants, such informational killing had nothing to do. Their task, first of all, was to prepare a huge mass of negative publications about these people in the media, necessary for compiling deputy requests and collective appeals of citizens, initiated by the leader of the Saratov United Russia, addressed to the first persons of the state, including the president and chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, heads of law enforcement agencies and law enforcement agencies, Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation Yuri Chaika, Chairman of the RF Investigative Committee Alexander Bastrikin, Minister of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation Rashid Nurgaliev, Director of the Federal Security Service of Russia Nikolai Patrushev, and then Bortnikov. In these requests and appeals, there were calls and demands to deal with objectionable persons, the reason for which was that numerous publications in the media, which, we repeat, they prepared at the direction of the same Volodintsy. And instead of solving urgent problems in the hot spots of the country, the Siloviki began to look for black cats in the dark rooms of Volodin's consciousness. They did not understand the logic of this hatred for those politicians who dared to have their own opinion and were in no hurry to publicly admire the merits of Vyacheslav Volodin. Yes, there is no logic here. Curators told them, who approached the solution of this issue with cold cynicism. In the end, they came to the conclusion that further work for Nikolai Pankov, under the strict guidance of the Volodinsky political strategist, Eduard Abrasimov, could lead to their professional degradation as journalists and to the complete loss of any kind of public reputation. Therefore, they decided to break with this sect and tell the whole truth about what exactly they had to do all these years. By the way, all this information is fully reflected in the book, which was written by the authors of these lines. We called our book just that, Black PR Prists of the Polar Bear. The basis for writing this book was the diary entries of one of the authors, Igor Osovin, which he kept almost daily throughout all these years, the decoding of hidden audio recordings of meetings and workshops, as well as the original documents that have survived in large numbers and our personal memories. So, the Black PR people spoke about the most significant episodes of their activities in the field of party PR and political technologies, when they carried out political orders under the leadership of Eduard Abrasimov, and then Roman Chuchenko, another protege of Vyacheslav Volodin, who now claims to be a deputy in the State Duma. In addition, Black PR people showed documents that left no doubt about the veracity of their words. All the material evidence shown at this press conference was previously recorded on DVDs and distributed to the journalists present. First of all, the Saratov Black PR people stated that in this region it was Nikolai Pankov, as the right hand of Vyacheslav Volodin, who was personally responsible for all party decisions, including in the field of propaganda and counter-propaganda, and also that shadow activities of PR and political technologists for the leaders of United Russia in Saratov is a priority compared to the work of formal party functionaries. Then the participants of the press conference spoke about the sources of funding and the structure of legal entities of PR specialists and political technologists of United Russia in Saratov. How exactly and from what sources were their activities funded? Firstly, they almost never received non-cash transfers for the work performed. All payments were made in cash, more often, in Russian rubles, less often, in US dollars. Gradually, they came to the conclusion that neither the official United Russia Election Fund, nor the bank account of the Saratov regional branch of the party, nor even the United Russia Party Support Fund during the 2007 election campaign had anything to do with financing these actions, most likely did not have. The source of funding for their activities, as the PR people themselves believe, was the Black Party Fund. Secondly, Nikolai Pankov himself never paid them personally. All calculations were made through Eduard Abrasimov, who paid off the Black PR people for their work. Eduard Nikolaevich did not hide the fact that he received cash from Pankov, and with him he coordinated all calculations and tariffs, which, of course, were unofficial in nature and were classified as secret documents. Nikolai Vasilyevich himself, according to Abrasimov, destroyed such documents after completing the task, so that not a single piece of paper that accidentally caught someone's eyes could compromise him. In total, only in the second half of 2007, about 2 million rubles passed through the hands of the Saratov Black PR people. For Saratov, such fees were more than decent. In addition, with the money of the party, a whole mycelium of a dubious kind of legal entities was created and functioned, through which United Russia controlled and financed publications that took an active part in the information wars on the side of Volodin and Pankov. It is possible that they all received non-cash funds from the United Russia Support Fund. At the same time, attempts were made to create a cunning financial scheme, which consisted in doubling the cash flow going to pay for the material and technical base of Black PR. Despite the great resource potential of United Russia, the party has always had a hard time with creativity. The party has constantly experienced a shortage of ideas and a shortage of people who could generate and implement these ideas. In this regard, the Sonder team of Nikolai Pankov turned out to be very useful. Not without pride, Black PR people spoke about the production of anonymous counter-propaganda posters and leaflets aimed at discrediting other political parties in the eyes of public opinion. It is worth noting that the participants in this press conference had to deal with the elections to the State Duma, held in 2007, both white and black PR. At the same time, the amount of work on black posters and leaflets was much larger. According to Abrasimov, black PR people learned that almost all printouts of finished layouts were shown in Moscow to Vyacheslav Volodin himself, and only after his approval went into circulation. In support of his words, Abrasimov proudly showed editorial notes on the layouts that Vyacheslav Volodin made with his own hand. The most responsible order for the muzzle makers was the production of a large photo album, United Russia, in the Saratov region, the geography of real cases. At the same time, they perfectly understood that much of what was written and filmed was a big stretch, and many objects financed through targeted federal and regional programs from budget funds, in fact, have nothing to do with the merits of United Russia. When, by mid-October 2007, after 2 months of hard work, the layout of this photo album was ready and had already been sent to Moscow for approval, Eduard Abrasimov said that there was no longer enough money to print it, since a lot of money was spent on black PR. As compensation, black PR people were instructed to produce a pamphlet in mass circulation, which all voters were to read. The author of the idea of this publication, according to Eduard Abrasimov, was Vyacheslav Volodin himself. Judging by the degree of attention United Russia showed to this project, it was very important for them. Initially, the brochure was called Party Leaders of the Saratov Region, Who is Who, but then Vyacheslav Volodin himself, according to Abrasimov, ordered the title to be changed to The Political Field of the Saratov Region, Who is Who. Apparently, Vyacheslav Viktorovich decided that there could be no other party leaders in the Saratov region besides himself. Then, on instructions from Moscow, the list of political parties represented in the Saratov region, whose leaders should be reflected in the brochure, was significantly reduced. According to Abrasimov, Volodin again insisted on this, who, they say, did not want such a solid party as United Russia to be on a par with marginal parties. As a result, the original concept of this reference publication, as planned, has undergone significant changes, and not for the better. But the most unpleasant moment for the authors of the pamphlet was that, on the instructions of Abrasimov, who now and then referred to Pankov, then to Volodin, they had to add information from their personal lives to biographical articles of politicians, which were tabloid in nature and, most likely, were complete nonsense. Such additions, of course, revived the dry reference material, but completely discredited the publication in the eyes of interested readers and thoughtful voters. What were the wise instructions of the party ideologist? For example, about the local leader of the Fair Russians, Vladimir Potsarov, it was necessary to write that he had a lot of illegitimate children. And at the same time, it was necessary to keep silent that Volodin and Pankov had known each other since their student days. Moreover, the photographs had to be selected in such a way that Volodin's associates looked like smart people, and all his opponents looked like klutzes, but not vice versa. That is why this pamphlet began to be perceived by everyone as exaggerated compromising information on the opponents of Volodin and his team, which, on the eve of the elections, was put into public circulation by the political technologists of United Russia. That is what she really was. And a few more characteristic points regarding the work on the content of this brochure. In fact, on the cover of this publication, as a political editor, Vyacheslav Volodin himself should have flaunted not the Zits chairman, but himself. It was he, according to Abrasimov, who treated this publication as his brainchild. He proposed adding such headings as pluses and minuses, patrons, friends, and enemies to the structure of biographical texts, and also made many others fundamental comments on the content of the brochure. Apparently, it was Volodin who, through Pankov, gave instructions on what accents should be placed in the disclosure of each topic raised, whether it be any party or a specific political figure. After that, Abrasimov, communicating with Pankov, meticulously recorded all the instructions that came from above and brought them to the attention of the black PR people in the form of an abstract. For example, in relation to the governor of the Saratov region, Pavel Ipatov, as was clear from the synopsis, an instruction was received to present him in the brochure as a completely shy and dependent figure who, we quote, is trying to negotiate with everyone, including the organized criminal group. They say, again a quote, the governor will demand from Volodin financial injections from the federal budget, which his ministers cannot independently break through. Ipatov is always trying to be smart and handsome at the same time. And get money from the federal budget through Volodin, and not quarrel with crime. End of quote. And these are far from the only installations that came about Ipatov from the United Russia think tank. Here are a few more quotes from the instruction given by Abrasimov: the governorship is a burden to Ipatov. He is a businessman. More gravitated towards Energoatom. More is located in Moscow, where his wife and children live. There are 3 days out of the week in the region. Ipatov has patrons: Gref, Kirienko, Chubai, Viktor Petrovich Ivanov. Mother-in-law Gref works for Ipatov in a sanatorium in Sochi. Collects expensive wines. And all these instructions are reflected in the text of the brochure. When the layout of the publication was completely ready, the black PR people handed it over to Abrasimov for final editing, and he took it to Pankov. For 3 or 4 days they waited for the result. What was their surprise when they returned this layout, dotted with numerous edits and cuts. They did not immediately guess by whose hand all these editorial changes were made. Abrasimov explained that Pankov personally took the layout of the brochure to Volodin in Moscow, and Vyacheslav Viktorovich, after a hard day's work, spent the whole night, not closing his eyes, sitting over the printouts, making corrections and cuts with his confident editorial hand. The next morning, he explained the meaning of these changes to Pankov, and Nikolai Vasilievich had already conveyed grains of invaluable knowledge to Eduard Nikolaevich, who, without spilling, handed them over to the black PR people, strictly punishing him to keep this draft as a relic, as a shrine to which Volodin himself venerated. They saved it. It was Vyacheslav Viktorovich, it turns out, who personally crossed out in the brochure a biographical article about Vladislav Tretyak, which, of course, was immediately removed from the content. As Abrasimov explained, having learned this from Pankov, the legendary hockey player cannot claim the role of a politician and party leader. In the eyes of Volodin, he is just a media person, like the wrestler Karelin or the gymnast Kabayeva, and therefore, they say, he should not overshadow Vyacheslav Viktorovich in this brochure as a real politician of a federal scale. The only thing that the black PR people, having become conscientious, could do for the legend of domestic sports, was to defend the placement of a small photo of Tretiak in a mosaic of faces on the penultimate cover page in front of United Russia customers. The financial component of this project deserves special attention. Eduard Abrasimov all the time demanded that the estimate be underestimated, and when it fell to the extreme limit, he began to demand that the real circulation be underestimated from the nominal one, which was indicated at 300,000 copies. As a result, this brochure was printed with a circulation of only 10,000 copies. And all the costs of its manufacture, in total, amounted to 1,132,600 rubles, which were brought to the black PR people, in cash, in a cardboard shoebox. The difference between the actual and declared costs, therefore, amounted to 3,663,200 rubles, but in reality it is much more if only printing costs are taken into account. And this is just one position of black PR. By the way, Eduard Abrasimov, as soon as he brought cash, immediately received a kickback in the amount of 100,000 rubles. The system of kickbacks was constantly practiced throughout the entire election campaign of 2007, when black PR people worked for United Russia. The kickback rate varied from 10 to 20%, depending on the amount of cash and the specific situation. At their press conference, the black PR people also told about the holding of various thematic roundtables by them, the customers of which were the Volodinцы. It was at one of these round tables that the political technologists of United Russia first worked out the methodology for dividing Jews into bad and good on the basis of their personal devotion to the cause of the party, and accusing objectionable Jews that they themselves speculate on the topic antisemitism, the methodology that then formed the basis of the PR technology unleashed by the Saratov United Russia information war, which had all the signs of a large-scale anti-Semitic campaign. A similar method of defamation was used in relation to public environmentalists, who, allegedly, in the interests of commercial structures close to them, using the green theme, whip up hysteria in order to destabilize the socio-political situation in the region and divert attention from the real state of affairs at environmental facilities, serving as a platform for the business of commerce. Other equally curious facts were made public at this press conference. For example, it turned out that black PR, on the instructions of the Volodymyr, during the election campaign of 2007, wet not only the political opponents of United Russia and personally Vyacheslav Volodin, but also party comrades who, for one reason or another, often for preventive purposes, had to be punished for their stubbornness. For example, the local TV boss Andrei Rososhansky did not want to PR the party on the air of the state television and radio broadcasting company, Saratov, for free, despite the fact that he himself, as a candidate for the regional Duma, was included in the party list. This, according to Abrasimov, irritated Volodin and angered Pankov, who, they say, decided to teach the swindler a lesson. This is how the plan for the political discrediting of Rososhansky developed by the black PR people was born, which Abrasimov really liked and which, it is possible, strained the TV magnate himself, who quickly adopted the new rules of the game. Then suddenly the command came, hang up. In addition, Volodinsky's black PR people held their actions not only in the Saratov region, but also beyond its borders. In particular, a press conference of well-known human rights activists from the capital, who had gathered to speak in defense of the Saratov opposition deputy, against whom a criminal case was initiated under a far-fetched pretext, was disrupted. Each of the participants in this PR landing received 10,000 rubles of remuneration, payment for daily allowances and travel tickets, plus an unpleasant aftertaste on the soul. How much Abrasimov himself, who organized this action, put into his pocket, one can only guess. Of course, the election campaign of 2007 was not without the mass release of the so-called black newspapers, which contained slander against representatives of political parties competing with United Russia. As the black PR people themselves admitted, there was simply no end to the United Russia customers. Some, especially tight-fisted ones, had to be turned down so as not to waste time negotiating with them. Even having tripled their staff, the muzzlers did not always cope with the volume of orders that fell upon them. In total, in addition to Saratov, they covered with their black PR more than 10 constituencies in rural areas of the region. The unscrupulousness of United Russia was simply amazing. Many observers were perplexed for a long time, how Vyacheslav Volodin could take into his service, and even the main ideologist of the Saratov regional branch of the party, Eduard Abrasimov, a man who in 2005 received a real term for slandering the same Volodin, trying to put him in blue light. Finally, the black PR people admitted that on November 19, 2007, it was they who organized the hooligan action, which led to the disruption of the press conference of Moscow political analysts Nina Odinokova and Alexander Kainev, held at the press center of the Saratov representative office of the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. Then an unknown person who burst into the premises shouted, "Glory to Russia," doused all those gathered with a bucket of feces. It is clear that the very next day after the shit throne, the propaganda machine of United Russia placed all responsibility for carrying out this action, unheard of in its audacity, on the opposition, which, they say, pulled off this multi-move in order to cast a shadow of suspicion on the party authorities. That, in fact, is all that was discussed at this press conference. And now let's sum up. In our opinion, the political technologists of the United Russia Party under the leadership of Nikolai Pankov, in the interests of Vyacheslav Volodin and his inner circle, developed and successfully put into practice a method of regularly deceiving the first persons of the state, the algorithm of which was as follows. In relation to the person declared Volodin's personal enemy, a series of negative publications in the media was first initiated, for which tools from the arsenal of black PR and dirty political technologies were used. Next, members of the public became more active, who only imitate the vigorous activity of building a civil society, but in fact are an obedient tool in the hands of Volodin's political strategists. These pseudo-social activists created the necessary public resonance for ordered publications in the media, or their actions themselves were an informational occasion for new custom-made articles and TV spots. There was a chain reaction that never led to a seemingly natural result, an explosion. Instead, when the number of publications reached its critical mass, the state authorities of the Russian Federation, including the highest officials of the country, the President of Russia and the Chairman of the Government of the Russian Federation, were sent numerous deputy requests and collective appeals of citizens, in which the signatories, demanding decisive measures against persons who were the objects of Volodin's attack, did not cite any real facts of their illegal activities, due to the complete absence of such, but only referred to numerous publications in the media dedicated to allegedly exposing this illegal activity. As a result, the first persons of the state formed a false idea about the real state of affairs in the Saratov region. Politicians and entrepreneurs objectionable to Volodin and his entourage were presented in a negative light, which had a negative impact both on the political climate within the region and on the level of assessments and decision-making on the merits federal leaders. This kind of technologically built disinformation of the first persons of the state can be regarded as a malfeasance committed by a group of persons by prior agreement. The abuse of official powers and the status of a deputy, in our opinion, is only a formal sign of this act, the perniciousness of which is only now being revealed by realizing the monstrous consequences for public morality and morality that such methods of struggle for power lead to. Ahead is the abyss. Thank God we had the courage and wisdom to stop. And now, standing at the edge of this bottomless abyss, where the irrepressible thirst for power of people like Volodin and Penkov pushed us, we look down with a shudder. We sincerely regret that for a number of years we have been in the hands of these people as a deadly weapon of information war, declared by them against those who were an independently thinking and independent person, the former black PR people publicly declared at the end of their sensational press conferences. And now let's imagine for a moment what consequences the use of the above methods and techniques of black PR across the country can lead to for society, especially when the post of president is at stake. Especially when in the hands of a person with such experience in ideological work, huge organizational and material resources are now concentrated, including such a political syndicate as the All-Russian People's Front. Chapter 7. Forward to the past. On May 6, 2011, at the United Russia Interregional Party Conference, held in Volgograd, the non-partisan chairman of this party, Vladimir Putin, unexpectedly voiced the idea of creating the All-Russian Popular Front, ONF. The very next day, on May 7, 2011, the Federal Coordinating Council of this movement was formed, which included prominent party functionaries of United Russia and leaders of public organizations loyal to the ruling regime. Leading political scientists and analysts immediately concluded that the ONF was being created as a broad coalition of social and political forces, which should first ensure the victory of United Russia in the elections to the State Duma of the Russian Federation in December 2011, and then, the victory of Vladimir Putin in the presidential elections RF in March 2012. However, Putin himself does not hide the fact that the ONF is set, first of all, tasks for the upcoming election cycle, which will not be limited to elections to the State Duma. Immediately, the initiative of the Federal Center was picked up in the Russian regions. For example, already on May 11, 2011, in the homeland of the ONF Chief of Staff Vyacheslav Volodin, in the Saratov region, an expanded meeting of the Executive Committee of the regional branch of United Russia was held, where the list of members of the local coordinating council of the All-Russian Popular Front, approved in Moscow, was announced, in which, of course, were the first persons of the regional branch of the Party of Power, and the leaders of public structures loyal to United Russia. Putin's plan, from managed democracy to sovereign. The process of forming the ONF on the ground immediately revealed a number of hidden factors that testify to the lack of political unity in United Russia itself. For example, the mass exodus of party functionaries to the front in order to obtain the coveted mandate of a State Duma deputy caused an increase in the intraspecific competition of the United Russia, prominent members of the party, who for one reason or another found themselves out of work, hastily began to create new public associations, for themselves, in order to join the ONF asset in their composition and count on a place in the party list. As a result, every day the ONF is becoming more and more a multi-party model created within the framework of one political party. As you know, the Charter of United Russia prohibits the creation of various factions within the party, but in fact they always arose, both at the federal level and at the regional level. Basically, these are factions of the leader type, formed around certain party leaders who defend the corporate interests of their team to a greater extent than the general party ones, not to mention the national ones. Now such charismatic party members, both in the center and in the localities, have a formal opportunity to achieve intra-party sovereignty of their positions without violating the party charter and Putin's doctrine of political construction taken as the basis. What are the principles of this doctrine, and on what historical examples is it based? Let's try to figure it out. In the 5th chapter of this book, we already noted that Vladimir Putin, perhaps without realizing it himself, is a follower of the so-called totalist tradition of philosophical perception of reality, the generally recognized pillars of which are considered to be the great Germans Hegel, Kant and Marx. But Putin's unconscious totalism, which he absorbed during his long stay in East Germany, is characterized by an extreme degree of political doctrinarism, which is most likely a manifestation of the experience acquired during his years in the KGB. Having witnessed the collapse of the USSR, and before that, the decay of the CPSU, Vladimir Putin, knowing well the external and internal causes of these phenomena, never harbored illusions that united Russia, in the form in which it was created as a party of power of bureaucrats, will retain its political monopoly for a long time to come. That is why Putin categorically refused to join this party, so that in the future, when united Russia rapidly begins to lose its authority, membership in it would not cause him major reputational costs. In view of the foregoing, it is difficult to agree with the popular opinion of political analysts that the initiative of the leader of United Russia, on the creation of the ONF, in fact, crosses out many of the previous achievements of his favorite party and even, in a sense, undermines some of the foundations of sovereign democracy. Firstly, it doesn't cross out, because the main achievement of United Russia is precisely the monopoly right to form the ruling bloc of party and non-party people, which can be the political stronghold of the Putin regime for many years to come. And secondly, these very foundations of sovereign democracy are being formed right now, only years after their principles were proclaimed by Vladislav Surkov in his Fulton speech, delivered by him on February 7, 2006 to listeners of the Center for Party Studies and WFP United Russia training. Vitaly Trofimov, the ideologue of the Nashi movement, this is not a typo, outlined these principles more frankly. Above all, the preservation of state sovereignty. Dmitry Kamyshev, a political observer for Kommersant magazine, argued in May 2011 that the creation of the ONF is tantamount to a public recognition of the failure of the previous party strategy, according to which United Russia, as a completely self-sufficient party of all Russians, was supposed to unite adherents of the most diverse ideologies, from patriotic statesmen to market liberals. Unfortunately, this statement cannot be accepted. What kind of party strategy can we talk about if United Russia, in fact, did not have it at all? Putin had such a strategy, and this is not the notorious Putin's plan, which was advertised at the time by United Russia. Putin's real plan, as it turns out only now, initially assigned United Russia an exclusively tactical task, building a managed democracy, as a necessary condition for the implementation of the second stage, which is already of strategic importance. But the second stage of Putin's plan is just the ONF, as the basic political basis of sovereign democracy. And you should not confuse these two concepts, managed democracy and sovereign democracy, because the first is understood as a political technology for achieving the task set by Putin, while the second is understood as a form of state system, the ideals of which, as mentioned above, are in the understanding Putin, should be sought in the historical experience of Germany. At the same time, what is most important, it is not so much about the experience of building a people's democracy in the GDR, where, as you know, under the conditions of the actual monopoly of the party of power of the SED, a multi-party system formally existed, and 4 more parties were represented in the People's Chamber. How much about the political experience of the Third Reich? But more on that below. It should also be noted that along with M.S. Gorbachev and M.M. Kazyanov, the doctrine of sovereign democracy was also criticized by D.A. Medvedev, whose political and philosophical differences with Putin, as we pointed out in the 5th chapter, are of a rather fundamental nature. In his interview to Expert magazine, number 28, 522, dated July 24, 2006, Dmitry Medvedev, first Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, expressed the opinion that the concepts of sovereignty and democracy belong to different conceptual categories, and they cannot be compared. If some definitions are attached to the word democracy, this creates a strange aftertaste. This suggests that after all we are talking about some other, non-traditional democracy, said Dmitry Anatolyevich, obviously ironically on the verge of a foul. Then Putin paid absolutely no attention to this attack. Unlike Surkov, whose pride was hurt. Later, Vladislav Yurievich will recoup, and very inventively. Now let's explain what we mean. As already mentioned, the publication of Dmitry Medvedev's article, Forward Russia, which was published on September 10, 2009 in the liberal online publication Gazeta Ru, caused a great surge of political activity. The first call for the creation of the movement Russia Forward was voiced by Gennady Gudkov, a member of the State Duma of the Russian Federation from A Just Russia, who proposed to join forces with everyone who is close to the idea of modernizing the country, expressed by the President of the Russian Federation. This movement was seen as a kind of popular front in support of modernization. However, the fair Russians were not able to register the OOD Russia Forward in the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Federation, which willingly accepted documents for the registration of a similar movement from United Russia, which caused United Russia to be publicly accused of plagiarism by the leaders of A Just Russia. As a result, the all-Russian public movement with the same name, Russia Forward. In April 2011, it was created on the basis of more than 50 regional branches of the Center for Social Conservative Policy, CSCP, of United Russia under the leadership of Yuri Shivalov, Deputy Secretary of the Presidium of the General Council of the United Russia WFP, coordinator of the CSPC. Many political analysts, not without reason, considered that the protracted struggle for this brand was the result of a nomenclatura confrontation between the Putin group and the Medvedev group, each of which is trying to saddle the modernization trend. And Medvedev, let's add on our own, often found himself in a situation where he had to go along the route deliberately laid out by Surkov, through futurization to modernization and immortality. Even in the previous years of Putin's stagnation, the activities of various groups of experts and analysts of a futurological orientation began to be associated with the name of the deputy head of the administration of the President of the Russian Federation Vladislav Surkov, which, in general, did not cause much surprise among knowledgeable observers. For example, in the West, this kind of non-governmental structures have had a significant impact on decisions made both at the state level and at the level of large business corporations since the middle of the last century. The works of leading futurologists have long become classics of the genre, and are now being studied in many universities around the world along with fundamental scientific research in the field of political science, economics, sociology, and even natural science. So, the most advanced part of such an expert community, from among Russian futurologists, has formed into a kind of club of the newspaper, Tomorrow, which since 1993 has been edited by Alexander Prokhanov, who calls himself Elder Philotheus. This publication, positioning itself as the Russian state newspaper, invariably comes out with a circulation of 100,000 copies, and its pages publish not only very voluminous analytical materials of the country's leading political scientists and futurologists, but also quite frank interviews with the most scandalous figures of Russian politics, from Anatoly Chubay to Vladimir Kvatchkov. At the same time, the image of the Zavtra newspaper as a purely oppositional publication is constantly formed in public opinion, and its editor-in-chief, an indispensable participant in almost all discussion talk shows on TV, is an implacable opponent of the current political regime. The ideology pursued by Prokhanov is based on the concept of the Fifth Empire, which can be assessed as a techno-esoteric utopia, referring us, on the one hand, to the ideological traditions of Russian Cosmism, and on the other hand, to the technocratic doctrines of the Third Reich mystics. Various authors have repeatedly expressed the idea that the newspaper, Tomorrow, in fact, is a project of the Kremlin, and its editorial policy is carried out under the supervision of Vladislav Surkov. Time has shown that this is the case. On September 16, 2009, when all the media vied with each other to discuss the explicit and hidden meanings of the presidential article, Forward Russia, and also carefully monitored the reaction of politicians and public figures to this publication, RIA Novosti stunned everyone with a message entitled as follows: Medvedev instructed study the ideas of a futurist on the development of the economy. Allow yourself a short quote from this text. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, the message said, instructed the Russian government to consider the proposal of Russian citizen Maxim Kalashnikov regarding the technological modernization of the economy, which he read on the internet. Kalashnikov expresses his opinion on the need to form a national innovation system. He proposes to create a Supreme Innovation Council of the national economy under the president, as well as an analog of the Advanced Defense Research Projects Agency, DARPA, under the U.S. Department of Defense. As you know, after a certain citizen Maxim Kalashnikov turned to citizen Medvedev, as the president said at a meeting with the head of the government of the Russian Federation Sergei Sobyanin, structures were created at the federal level that, to one degree or another, correspond to the tasks of the country's development, designated by the futurist in his message to the head of state. First, in February 2010, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin headed the Innovation Commission in the government of the Russian Federation, created back in 2008 under the chairmanship of Deputy Prime Minister Sergei Ivanov, which was first reported to the press by Vladislav Surkov. This was a response to the creation of the Commission for Modernization and Technological Development under the President of the Russian Federation, the very fact of the appearance of which emphasized the priority of D.A. Medvedev in these matters. The President accepted the challenge and sent the Strategy for Innovative Development of the Russian Federation for the period up to 2020, presented at the end of 2010, prepared by the Ministry of Economy, for revision. Then, already in early May 2011, it was announced that, on the initiative of Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, the Agency for Strategic Initiatives, ASI, was being created, which by 2012 should receive the status of a state agency. The newspaper, Kommersant, reported that the Agency for Strategic Initiatives will coordinate the work of innovative departments in most departments and coordinate the work of a number of scientific state programs and federal targeted programs. Moreover, the idea of creating such an agency was voiced personally by Putin, speaking in Volgograd with a proposal to form a popular front. And just a few days after Vladimir Putin's speech, Alexander Klunov, director of the Department of Science, High Technologies and Education of the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, said that the Russian government was discussing the possibility of implementing a new large-scale international scientific project in the country with a budget of over $10 billion. Many observers immediately regarded this as an attempt by Putin's team to create a political alternative to the Skolkovo project, which has already become the brand of Medvedev's innovation policy. This was followed by a public exchange of pricks between the Minister of Economic Development of Russia Elvira Nabialina and aide to the President of the Russian Federation Arkady Dvorkovich. So who is this citizen Maxim Kalashnikov who started this whole innovative carousel? Vladimir Kucherenko, who took the pseudonym Maxim Kalashnikov, born in 1966, is a fairly popular writer and publicist in Russia, who began his career as a professional journalist. He worked as a correspondent in Evening Moscow, a columnist in the Megapolis Express Weekly, accredited to the government of the Russian Federation by the columnist of Rossiyskaya Gazeta, deputy editor-in-chief of the Stringer newspaper. He also collaborated with a number of online publications. Author of more than 30 books, many of which are written in a futurological vein. In collaboration with Sergei Kugashev, he created a large-scale work, The Third Project, published in 3 volumes. He is also a co-author of the Nuremir TV Internet project, maintains his own blog, and publishes in the open electronic newspaper form. Moscow Time. In addition, Kucherenko Kalashnikov is the Secretary for Strategic Development of the Presidium of the Central Council of the Motherland, Common Sense Party and the author of the concept of creating a state corporation in Russia. He belongs to the circle of intellectuals who are developing a new ideological doctrine, the spokesman for which is the newspaper, Tomorrow, calls himself a man from another reality and a citizen of the empire. But perhaps the most high-profile project, among the ideologists of which was Maxim Kalashnikov, is the Strategic Public Movement, Russia, 2045, created in February 2011. The concept of this movement of Russian scientists, theorists and experimenters, is based on the postulates of the theory of technological singularity in Kurzwein's exponential theory of progress. According to the forecast of the famous American inventor and futurist Raymond Kurzwein, by 2045 a person will become immortal. Already, scientists from the Singularity University, created by the efforts of NASA and Google, as well as the Institute of Artificial Intelligence in San Francisco, USA, are already struggling with this task. But unlike their American colleagues, Russian scientists decided to take a simpler path, not to waste time and money on creating artificial intelligence that would become the bearer of the matrix of the human personality, but to make every effort to create an artificial human body that would last for an arbitrarily long time, controlled by his biological brain. That is why the main activities of the scientific team of Russia 2045, which are still at the stage of developing technical specifications, are the creation and production of artificial human organs on an industrial scale, the development of cellular technologies and, as part of the implementation of the pilot project Avatar, the improvement of neural interfaces to control cyborgs. We believe that it is possible and necessary to eliminate aging and even death, to overcome the fundamental limits of physical and mental capabilities set by the limitations of the biological body. Scientists from around the world are already developing separate technologies that can ensure the creation of a prototype of an artificial human body over the next decade. The country that first declares its intention to combine these technologies and create a working cybernetic organism will become the leader of the most important world technological project of our time. That country should be Russia, reads the movement's manifesto, published on February 22, 2011. On the same day, the participants of the Russia 2045 SOD made an open address to the President of the Russian Federation D.A. Medvedev, in which they supported his modernization course of the country's development and stated the need to form a social order for such scientific developments. Scientists are confident that, not later than 2045, an artificial body will not only significantly surpass the existing one in terms of its functionality, but will also achieve the perfection of form and will be able to look no worse than a human one. People will independently make a decision to continue life and develop in a new body after all the resources of the biological body are exhausted. A new person will receive a huge range of opportunities, will be able to easily endure extreme external conditions, high temperatures, pressure, radiation, lack of oxygen, and so on. With the help of a neural interface, a person will be able to remotely control several bodies of various shapes and sizes. The participants in the Russia 2045 movement draw attractive prospects. In the bowels of this movement, on the initiative of the president of New Media Stars, Dmitry Itskov, in March 2011, the Immortality Corporation was created, which outlined a schedule for the implementation of the ambitious tasks facing Russia 2045. The program that the scientists who joined this movement are developing looks really impressive, and the Putin plan, against its background, looks like picking in a sandbox. What is the strategic plan of Russia 2045? First stage. To develop a complete artificial copy of a person, controlled by thought through a neural interface, by 2015. Launch mass production of artificial human bodies and bring them to the market as a mass product by 2020. Second phase. Create an artificial body suitable for transplantation of a human brain into it at the end of biological life, and work out the process of such transplantation by 2021. Go to serial production of such bodies and start mass brain transplantation by 2025. Third stage. To carry out the transfer of the non-material structure of human consciousness into a completely artificial body by 2031. Ensure the possibility of such a procedure for anyone by 2045. There is also a fourth stage, which implements the idea of K.E. Tsiolkovsky about the radiant man, namely, the design and creation of a hologram body. According to a number of analysts, the political calculation of the authors of this whole undertaking is as simple as a steamed turnip. In order to get rid of all diseases, aging and gain immortality, it is necessary that scientists, united in the Russia 2045 movement, bring their fantastic projects to practical implementation. And for this they need appropriate conditions for work, the main of which is the further continuation of the innovation policy pursued by the President of the Russian Federation Medvedev. Therefore, the presence of Dmitry Medvedev as President is a guarantee that you, dear voters, will live to the moment when you can get immortality. In 2045, Dmitry Medvedev, if nothing bad happens, will turn 80 years old, after which, having won the immense gratitude of his contemporaries, he will be able to retire. More precisely, having found a suitable artificial body for yourself, you can enjoy life forever, surrendering to your favorite hobbies. Or, continue to rule us forever. Say fantasy. It has been noticed for a long time and not by us, nothing becomes obsolete as quickly as the future. It is difficult to say how they reacted to this brilliant PR move in Putin's headquarters. At least on May 16, 2011, the White House political strategists had to be pretty nervous, and for good reason. On this day, the famous Hollywood actor and public figure Steven Seagal made a video message to Vladimir Putin, spreading it via the internet. America's most famous Buddhist invited our Prime Minister to meet to discuss the details of the Russia 2045 project. Calling Putin an outstanding world leader, Steven Seagal, who did not understand the intricacies of tandemocracy, expressed hope for further cooperation within the framework of this project. It seems that the Kremlin has not been so happy with such a successful joke for a long time. The piquancy of this whole situation was given by the fact that the future ideologist of Russia 2045, Maxim Kalashnikov, encouraged by the attention to his person from the President of the Russian Federation Dmitry Medvedev, on November 20, 2010 published in his blog an open letter to the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin, in which he predicted the Prime Minister would soon be overthrown by the liberals with the support of the United States. Moreover, the futurist suggested that Vladimir Putin carry out, no, not the transition to a hologram body, but the transfer of power to patriotic forces in exchange for eternal refuge in Russia and maintaining the status of a billionaire. Unlike Medvedev, the senior tandemocrat did not answer anything to the futurologist. Ordinary clericalism. How did the Russian Orthodox Church react to all these godless election initiatives? And in general, what position did the ROC take in this turbulent era of political change? To answer this question, it is enough to give one very significant example. On May 9, 2011, Russia celebrated the 66th anniversary of the great victory of the Soviet people over Nazi Germany in the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945 on a grand scale. This holiday was not overshadowed even by the fact that the President of the Russian Federation Medvedev took the military victory parade on Red Square in a sitting position, although the status of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces of the country suggests that he still do it while standing. As always, during these holidays, a serious public discussion broke out on the pages of the print media and online resources about the past war itself and the lessons it taught. But this time, the focus of the blogosphere and the sharks of the pen was not so much on the participants in those memorable events, but on the living statesmen and other public figures who used the theme of the great victory for their political and other purposes. Among those was His Holiness Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia. In particular, the rector of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, ROCMP, Vladika Kirill, was reminded of the words he publicly uttered during a sermon back on June 3, 2009, on the day of the feast of the Vladimir icon of the Mother of God, when he celebrated the Divine Liturgy at the Moscow Sretensky Monastery. After reading the Gospel, the Patriarch addressed the audience with the first hierarch's word, stating, among other things, the following. People lived a deep religious life, faith was not on the periphery, but at the center of this life. Most of our people had a vivid, deep personal religious experience, the experience of experiencing the divine presence in their lives. Therefore, the fear of God was strong, and when adversity occurred, it never occurred to anyone to explain these cataclysms by political, economic, social or other reasons. Hereinafter it is highlighted by us. Author, finding fault somewhere far away, and thus, as if protecting themselves from the judgment of God, they say, we are not to blame, but the combination of circumstances, the laws of history, and much more. Everyone is entitled to their own interpretation of history, and scholars explain it in their own way. The Church, however, has the right to spiritually see the historical paths of the people. A believing person has the right and opportunity to see the hand of God in his life, in the history of his fatherland, and to understand what God's punishment is. Some are perplexed. Why was the last war so terrible and bloody? Why did so many people die? Where does the incomparable suffering of people come from? But if we look at this military catastrophe with the same gaze with which our pious ancestors looked at the past and present, then how can we refrain from absolutely clear evidence that this was a punishment for sin, for the terrible sin of the apostasy of the whole people, for trampling on shrines, for blasphemy and mockery of the Church, of the shrines, of the faith? How could such a terrible phenomenon in the life of the people as the destruction of the believing part of society, the destruction of the Church, the condemnation of people to suffering, martyrdom and confession, but if, instead of a terrible punishment, material prosperity and the victory of ideology followed, then involuntarily every sane believer would ask, where is the judgment of God? Is it really only in eternity? Does he not extend his hand over history? But the punishment of God is not a manifestation of some despotism and cruelty, it is the establishment of a balance, without which any human system will collapse. The history of our fatherland, like perhaps no other, teaches that the judgment of God takes place not only in eternity, but also in history. And the Lord, showing his justice, punishes people. Sometimes these punishments are very terrible. Not only individuals are punished, but also human communities, and this was the case from the universal flood to the last terrible world war. End of quote. What conclusion after such words of the pastor suggests itself? Firstly, the Great Patriotic War, it turns out, was sent by God to the Soviet people, who paid tens of millions of lives for it. Secondly, fascism was the scourge of God, and the Führer Adolf Hitler was an instrument of the Lord, who made retribution for unbelief in him. If so, then another question involuntarily arises, then who, then, in fact, did the Soviet people defeat in this unequal battle, Hitler or the Lord? Or, in the understanding of the Patriarch of the ROCMP, there is no difference in this. And then, what does establishing a balance mean? What kind of balance are we talking about? About the balance of the forces of good and evil, light and darkness, as in Sergei Lukyanenko's Watches? Or, about racial balance, as in the works of the scientists of the Third Reich? Of course, I would like to hear from the clergy frank and unambiguous answers to these clearly posed questions, since, in our opinion, a lot depends on this. Meanwhile, these words of the Patriarch, on the days of the celebration of the 66th anniversary of the Great Victory, caused a lively discussion on the Hyde Park social network, after the Hyde Parker, Vlad Vasilkov, quoted on his blog an article by his colleague, a top blogger of the social network, LiveJournal, LJ, known as Technomat. Very quickly, this blogger's post became the most popular in the LiveJournal rating and attracted thousands of comments from visitors. In order to understand why, we will partially quote this text. Our people deserved war with Germany. We treated the ROC too badly. So says Patriarch Kirill. But Hitler treated the Russian Orthodox Church well, built Orthodox churches in Germany. The Great Patriotic War is a punishment for sin, for the terrible sin of the apostasy of the whole people, for trampling on shrines, for blasphemy and mockery of the Church, the Patriarch declares. God sent the troops of the Third Reich to us as an instrument of love and admonition. Crusade against the apostates. Orthodox hierarchs blessed, the government of the Reich will find full consent and support from our side. May God bless the great leader of the German people, who raised the sword against the enemies of God himself, and so on. In the occupied territories, the Nazis opened Orthodox churches, in which those who wished could pray, for the Christ-loving authorities of the German people, and for the speedy victory of the Germans. Give victory, Lord, to the leader of the German people, Adolf Hitler, cried the priests of the Pskov Orthodox mission. Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army received great support from the Orthodox hierarchs. This support has not weakened to this day. In 2009, the leadership of the foreign wing of the Russian Orthodox Church issued a statement according to which Vlasov is a true patriot of Russia. But there was a turning point in the war. Suddenly it turned out that all Soviet soldiers abruptly became believers. There were no unbelievers in the war, and the only difference was that some knew how to be baptized, while others did not. Both those and others went on the attack with one sigh, "Lord, save, help, protect," says Patriarch Kirill. How do atheists suddenly become believers, you ask? Yes, very simple. After such a surge of spirituality, God decided that admonition can be curtailed, and gave us the victory. Do not look for the merits of the Soviet army here. The enemy was so well organized, armed, superior to us in every way, that our victory cannot be perceived otherwise than as a miracle. This interesting version of events is also being broadcast by state television. Russian Orthodox Church priest Vladimir Petrov urges his colleagues not to lie. How false our words sound with you that it was the Orthodox people who allegedly won the war. Of course, it would be nice if every Russian soldier went into battle with the Jesus prayer on his lips and in his heart, and died not with the words, "Please consider me a communist," but with the words, "God is with us." But that was not the case in that war, brothers and sisters. Rather, it was so, but not in the Red Army, but among the Nazis. On their fascist standards and emblems was written, "God is with us." There were crosses on their tanks and planes. Everything is in vain. And since military successes depend only on how we treat the Russian Orthodox Church, it becomes clear why victory memorials are being replaced with churches, why the Church so brazenly demands military facilities, including the surgical building of the Saratov Military Hospital, why Kaliningrad castles, received as a result of the war, are transferred to the Russian Orthodox Church. Why military field temples based on KAMAZ trucks participate in military exercises. We need to react, and react as quickly as possible. Activists of the Sanity Fund appeal to the Prosecutor General and the President of Russia with a demand to restore the rule of law. Support us. End of quote. What the aforementioned Sanity Fund is, it becomes clear from the information we glean from the website of this organization. In September 2010, several bloggers from LiveJournal, united by the idea of protecting the secular foundations of the state, decided to exit the virtual world of the internet into the real world. The first project of this self-organized initiative group was the continuation of the International Atheist Campaign http://www.atheistcampaign.ru. However, the constitutionally guaranteed right to freely disseminate one's beliefs, Article 28, ran into widespread opposition from both official authorities and business structures. The group received more than 20 refusals to place on a commercial basis billboards with quotes from the 14th article of the Russian Constitution, which establishes the secular status of the state. The group, which was directly confronted with the facts of religious censorship, decided to move away from the idea of promoting directly atheistic views to human rights activities to uphold the constitutional principles of secularism and separation of church and state. Thus, in November 2010, the Sanity Foundation was born, a non-profit and independent public organization, the website says. Among the already sensational projects of this public fund is the creation of an all-Russian database of violations by the Church and officials of secular principles enshrined in the Constitution of Russia, called Clerical Russia. Among the latest high-profile initiatives of the anti-clericals is an open appeal to the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, which, in particular, states, from media reports, in particular, from the Dengi magazine, Commerçant Publishing House, number 14, 821, dated 11.04, 2011. We became aware of violations of the principles of a secular state enshrined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation, Article 14, in the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. According to the magazine, at 57.6 million rubles per year will cost taxpayers the maintenance of Orthodox priests, who in 2011 will fill full-time positions in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This year, 240 full-time clergymen will be engaged in the spiritual guidance of military personnel. The head of the Ministry of Defense, Anatoly Serdyukov, stated that the salary of full-time priests in the army would be the same as that of the deputies for educational work of the brigade, a little more than 20,000 rubles per month. We believe that the appearance of clergy in the staff list of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, as well as the payment of salaries from the budget of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, violates paragraph 2 of Art. 14 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, which states that religious associations are separate from the state and equal before the law. As you already understood from the post of the Technometa blogger quoted above, the story related to the attempt of the Russian Orthodox Church to seize one of the buildings of the Saratov military hospital has already been publicized on the web. This scandal did not have time to flare up, as the local episcopate immediately disowned their idea and hastened to refute the claims of the ROCMP to this property complex. Change of white coats to black cassocks now seems to be no threat. Soldiers wounded in the North Caucasus can recover calmly. The media did not have time to subside on this occasion, when another appeared, the construction of an Orthodox church on the territory of the town of SSU. Ng Chernyshevsky and the subsequent initiative of the ROCMP to erect the same one, but now on the Sparrow Hills in Moscow, next to the Moscow State University. MV Lomonosov. Protests on this occasion from the side of the public are only gaining momentum. Now another scandal may break out at the federal level. We are talking about the liquidation of the Saratov Higher Military Engineering School of Chemical Protection and an attempt to build a monastery complex of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate in its place. Political analysts who closely follow the dynamic developments in the sphere of relations between the church and the state notice, not without reason, that Dmitry Medvedev found himself in a rather ambivalent position. On the one hand, he is favored by the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church, headed by Bishop Kirill, who, being a sophisticated politician, on the eve of the 2012 elections, will most likely make every effort to use this situation with the greatest benefit to strengthen the material base of the church. In addition, Vladimir Putin's unspoken church divorce from his wife, Ludmila Alexandrovna, after which she took tonsure and became abbess of St. By the way, this is precisely why the officially published information on the income and property of VV Putin's wife for 2010 contains only dashes. VV has already followed the example of his boss last year, Volodin, who also divorced. In addition, the constant claims of the spiritual mentor Vladimir Putin, the abbot of the Moscow Sretensky Monastery, Archimandrite Tikhon Shevkinov, with his Lessons of Byzantium, to the role of the main Orthodox ideologist of post-Yeltsin Russia, Patriarch Kirill cannot but cause professional jealousy. But, on the other hand, the course towards modernization announced by the president, with all the innovative solutions that follow from this, which, for example, is proposed by the movement of scientists, Russia, 2045, does not fit into the church paradigm at all, which already puts Bishop Kirill himself in an ambivalent position. Otherwise, the Church will have to radically revise many of its postulates, for which it is clearly not ready. In addition, the social base of Medvedev's innovative policy is just people with an atheistic worldview, who are alien to church dogmatism and political conservatism, identified in the public mind with the unity of church and state. And the conclusion from all this suggests itself as follows: if Putin and Medvedev, having not agreed on the outcome of the 2012 elections, come together in a clinch, the church will definitely put on Putin and call on its flock to vote for him. Otherwise, it will be a completely different church than the one we have known for the past 20 years. But is Putin himself really that churched? To what extent is he guided in making political decisions by the instructions that he hears from his pastor? It hears, not just listens. From the Third Rome to the Third Reich. May 23, 2009 on the square in front of the main building of SSU. Ng Chernyshevsky, a bronze monument to the Holy Equal to the Apostles brothers Cyril and Methodius was erected by sculptor Alexander Roznikov. The consecration and opening of this monument was the culmination of many days of celebrations as part of the Days of Slavic Literature and Culture in Saratov, which was attended by many high-ranking officials and church leaders, including from abroad. There were many disputes about the advisability of erecting a monument in this city, but almost none of the host of philologists and historians involved in various scientific conferences and readings dedicated to the celebration of the Days of Slavic Literature and Culture openly expressed their doubts about the merits of the main characters of the celebration, Cyril and Methodius. Regrettably for the hierarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church and high officials of the state power of the Russian Federation, who started all this Cyril and Methodius campaign, there is still no consensus among Russian and foreign scientists on a number of key issues regarding this topic. Namely, who, in fact, were these historical characters, Cyril and Methodius, canonized as saints by the Orthodox Church? What, in reality, did each of them have to do with the creation of the so-called Slavic writing? What kind of writing did the Solon brothers create? What was the written culture of Russia in the pre-Cyrillic period? For what purpose was the reform of the written language carried out, who exactly carried it out and in whose interests? Surprisingly, it is a fact, in Soviet times, when the Church was not only separated from the state, but also constantly persecuted by this state, in the issue of attitude to the Cyrillo-Methodius problematics between these antagonists, the Church and the state, there was complete mutual understanding, as a result of which the scientific approach and the official Church approach to this topic practically coincided, if we do not take into account the theological component of this issue. Both from the university department and from the seminary department, in fact, the same theses sounded at the same time, which built a certain common official doctrine. Cyril and Methodius are the great Slavic enlighteners who brought writing to our land, thanks to which, according to the ROC, the people came to know the sacred scripture and converted to the faith of Christ, and thanks to which, according to the CPSU, the foundations of cultural development were laid and the process of uniting the scattered ancient Russian lands into a single state began, which made it possible to move to a new, higher level of production relations in full accordance with the Marxist-Leninist theory of linguistics. What is most curious, in the Soviet intellectual environment, especially in the circles of national patriots from among the humanities, Cyril and Methodius were perceived as a kind of opposite of another historical tandem, Marx and Engels, the same products of mythodesign, like the Solonsky brothers, which only strengthened the overall effect of the formal confrontation between church and state, on the one hand, and once again emphasized the doctrinaire closeness of church and state in relation to the Cyrillo-Methodian problem, on the other hand. This situation was especially evident in communist Bulgaria, when under Todor Zhivkov the annual holiday in honor of Cyril and Methodius was celebrated on a state scale. In almost every Bulgarian city mass demonstrations and large-scale cultural events were held, where, next to the portraits of the founders of Marxism-Leninism and George Dimitrov hung icons with the faces of saints equal to the apostles. There was even an official state award named after Cyril and Methodius, who were priests, but not commanders, like, say, Prince Alexander Nevsky, later canonized by the Church, in whose honor the corresponding order was also established in the USSR. Apparently, such an ideological closeness of the state and church approaches to the Cyrillo-Methodian problems was based on the common ideology of geopolitical domination. In this case, Marx and Engels acted as the founders of the Communist International, which set as its goal the implementation of the proletarian revolution on a global scale, and Cyril and Methodius, in the role of symbols of the idea of panslavism, which is understood by the Eurasians as the historical international of the Slavic Turkic ethnic groups. And is it not for this purpose that along the entire route of the resettlement of the Proto-Bulgarians, who were nomadic tribes of Turkic origin, monuments to Cyril and Methodius are now erected, as ritual monuments symbolizing the historical path of the Slavs? In Samara, where the Volga Bulgaria used to stretch, a monument stands. In Saratov, where the nomadic Proto-Bulgarians used to pass, rushing to the Black Sea region, a monument stands. In Sevastopol, on the Crimean Peninsula, where the sedentary nature of these tribes began to appear, a monument stands. Of course, there are monuments to the Solon brothers in the two central cities of the Slavic world, Kiev and Moscow. Moreover, the Moscow monument to Cyril and Methodius is like 2 drops of water, similar to the monument erected in Saratov, which once again testifies to the low artistic value of these bronze statues. In a word, some kind of Tsaratelevskina. But a more amazing metamorphosis took place in the post-Soviet era, not at the formal level of the unity of church and state, when representatives of the country's top leadership act as living candlesticks at all-night services, but precisely at a meaningful, non-public level of attitude to Cyril and Methodius issues, where a serious divergence in views on the role of Cyril and Methodius in the history of Russia between the official scientific and religious doctrines, which was not the case before, with the formal delimitation of church and state. Indeed, the ways of the Lord are inscrutable. So, director of the Institute of Russian History of the Russian Academy of Sciences, corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences A.N. Sakharov, who is the mouthpiece of scientific officialdom, in the fundamental work of 5 Doctors of Historical Sciences of the IRA, which he edited and for which he himself wrote a section on the history of ancient Russia, History of Russia. From ancient times to the beginning of the 21st century, such a great historical figures, like Cyril and Methodius, did not devote not only a separate chapter, but even a small paragraph, limiting himself to mentioning them in only one paragraph. The basis of any ancient culture is writing. When did it originate in Russia? For a long time there was an opinion that the letter came to Russia along with Christianity, with church books and prayers. However, it is difficult to agree with this. There is evidence of the existence of Slavic writing long before the Christianization of Russia. This is also evidenced by the testimony of the Byzantine diplomat and Slavic educator Cyril. During his stay in Chersonese in the 60s. 9th c. he got acquainted with the Gospel written in Slavic letters, Glagolitic, the invention of which many scientists attribute to Cyril himself. Author. Subsequently, Cyril and his brother Methodius became the founders of the Slavic alphabet, which, apparently, was based in some part on the principles of Slavic writing that existed among the Eastern, Southern and Western Slavs long before their Christianization. And everything more about Cyril and Methodius, in this 1,264-page work, which is considered to be the basic historical doctrine of the ideology of the ruling political regime in Russia, there is not a word. While the childhood and youth of Genghis Khan, academician Sakharov even gave a nominal paragraph on a whole page in a small font. We are not talking about the fact that these mean lines about Cyril and Methodius actually put an end to it, but not orthodox. On the ideological unity of the positions of the Church and the State on the issue of Cyril and Methodius, which, I repeat, was observed during the years of the totalitarian regime, when there were persecutions of the Church. And this is now, when the demonstrative fraternization of Church and State can be seen at any grandiose event. What explains such a paradox? Is not an easy question. On this account, we have our own conspiracy version, which is as follows. Apparently, after the arrival of VV Putin to power in 1999, the new political leadership of the country was preoccupied with finding its own ideological doctrine that would fully meet the totalitarian demands of the Petersburg, the new elite, most of which are from the bowels of the KGB FSB. The Germanophile beliefs of the German in the Kremlin, as political scientist Alexander Rohr called Putin, predetermined the choice of the ideology of National Socialism, which brought pre-war Germany out of poverty and devastation into the ranks of the leading powers of the world, but only, of course, in a transformed form, adapted to contemporary political realities and current conventions of international law. There is a lot of evidence of the existence of the German way of Russia. It was the German system of state capitalism that formed the basis of Putin's new economic policy, who, using the example of Oleg Deripaska, already directly gives instructions to private owners, which economic agreements they need to sign and which not. It was the German scientific and technological developments, which were shelved at one time, that finally began to be implemented under Putin, as evidenced by many innovative projects, including in the military space application, the theoretical basis of which was laid by a self-taught engineer Viktor Schauberger, Tsiolkovsky, of the Third Reich. It was the history of Nazi Germany under Vladimir Putin that became the most sought-after literary and publishing trend, in a country that was once considered the most reading in the world, which clearly confirms the assortment of any bookstore in Russia. Such a huge number of published memoirs and diaries of top leaders and commanders of the Third Reich, not to mention the special historical literature on this topic, you will not find anywhere in the world. It was the German aesthetics of the 30s and 40s of the last century that began to dominate the semi-official muralist on the streets of Russian cities and at United Russia Party congresses, which any culturologist will confirm to you, and we are talking not only about Zurab Tsereteli's great power megalomania, just look at the monument Marshal Zhukov in Moscow or on the monument to Dresden Stolypin in Saratov. That is why the years of Putin's rule in Russia saw an occult renaissance, rooted in the esoteric doctrines of the Thule Society and the Ahnenerbe, the German Society for the Study of Ancient Germanic History and the Heritage of Ancestors, created in 1935 with the aim of providing scientific and ideological support functioning of the state apparatus of the Third Reich. Just the craze for runology, which is the basis of German occultism, what is it worth? It was precisely the runic writing of the ancient Slavs that academician Sakharov most likely had in mind when he pointed out the written monuments of pre-Christian Russia in an academic publication. We are not talking about the resounding success of Vladimir Sorokin's novel trilogy, Ice, which is an artistic and esoteric transcription of the doctrine of the world, eternal, Ice of the cosmologist and mystic of German Nazism Hans Herbiger. Therefore, it is not surprising that a friend of the writer, Ilya Lozovsky, who is considered a Russian Nazi, actively worked in the campaign headquarters of businessman Andrei Polaznik, a party ally and old friend of Vyacheslav Volodin. And this is not the only case of its kind. By the way, from the moment of its formation, as an ideological structure, the United Russia Party relied on the historical experience of the Party of Power of the Third Reich. Such a conclusion can be drawn from the revelations of Eduard Abrasimov, a former political consultant and media advisor to State Duma Deputy Nikolai Pankov, right hand, by Vyacheslav Volodin. In his article published on November 15, 2010 in the regional edition of the Nasha Versiya newspaper in Saratov, Abrasimov not only draws parallels between the work of the law enforcement system of the Third Reich and Putin's Russia, but also claims that back in 2000, in preparation for the first of the Unity Congress, he personally, guided by the experience of party building of the NSDAP, wrote theses for Boris Gryzlov summarizing the ideological and organizational guidelines of the new political structure. As for another no less scandalous novel by Vladimir Sorokin, Blue Fat, State Capitalism Under the Conditions of Party Dictates, and the Geopolitical Axis, Moscow-Berlin, and much, much more from Putin's are prescribed there in an alternative historical form. Paradigms of what could have been if the USSR had reconciled with Germany. In order to bring a new historical basis to the ideological doctrine of the Putin regime, the old scientific approach to the Cyrillo-Methodian problematics, which was the basis of traditional historiography, was no longer suitable. And then scientists of the historical and revisionist direction turned out to be in demand, V.A. Shudanov, U.D. Pedakov, V.N. Demon, A.I. Asov and other followers of the so-called Northern tradition, which claims that the Aryan roots of slavism lie beyond the Arctic Circle, where Hyperborea, Arctida, which gave rise to our civilization, stretched for thousands of kilometers. At the origins of this theory was the researcher of the texts of the Rig Veda, the Indian scientist and public figure Bal Gangadhar Tilak, 1856–1920. Later, Tilak's theory, but already in relation to the Nordic race, was developed in his book, The Descent of Man, 1928, by the Dutch-German scientist and mystic Hermann Wirth, 1885–1981, who became one of the founders and the first head of Ahnenerbe. This idea, about the existence in antiquity of Hyperborea Arctida Arctigia, from where the civilization of Supermen came out, became dominant in the entire mystical and ideological construction of the Third Reich. It was the Russian paleographer and runist Valery Shudanov, whose archaeological research was called upon to confirm this scientific hypothesis, who, with the help of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation, in 2002 took the post of chairman of the Commission on the History of Culture of Ancient Russia of the Council on the History of Culture under the presidium of the Russian Academy of Sciences and headed the Research Institute of Old Slavonic and Ancient Eurasian Civilization. In fact, in Russia at the beginning of the 2000s, what was already observed in Germany in the 20s and 30s of the last century began to happen: scientific societies receiving state support, expeditions, excavations. The activity of Putin's Hyperborean scientists simply strikingly resembles the history of the formation, the ideology of German Nazism, which was cultivated on the basis of similar esoteric doctrines, new archaeological data and incredible historical discoveries, which in their totality allow us to talk about the right of a separate ethnic group to world domination. Even the recent expeditions to the Arctic, initiated by Vladimir Putin under the auspices of the Russian Geographical Society, which he revived, project in our minds the scientific expeditions of the Germans to the Arctic latitudes and Tibet. It should also be taken into account that, in addition to the Hyperboreans, A.T. Fomenko, G.V. Nosovsky and their students, including the Bulgarian Yurden Tabov, are followers of the new chronology, at the origins of which was Isaac Newton, and in Soviet Russia, N.A. Morozov, as well as M.M. Postnikov, who passed on the secret historical and astronomical knowledge of the Priory of Zion to an inquisitive student of mathematics at Moscow State University Anatoly Fomenko. Despite the difference in methodological approaches to the consideration of similar historical issues, both of these scientific schools are united precisely by the fact that the end product of historical research, both Hyperboreans and new chronographs, fits perfectly into the ideological doctrine of Putin's Russia. Even northern Palmyra, as the center of political influence in the country in the place of the revival of the Aryan spirit of Europe, St. Petersburg, endow with a special, sacred meaning. In this vein, the hidden purpose of the initiative of the President of the Russian Federation D.A. Medvedev, who signed Decree No. 549 of May 15, 2009, which cuts off the oxygen for Putin's revisionist historians, which provides a breeding ground for the cultivation of the ideas of Aryan revenge. There is no doubt that the interests of the Russian Orthodox Church were hidden behind this initiative of Medvedev, which, being the bearer of the Judeo-Christian doctrine, is quite hostile to both the Hyperboreans and the new chronograph Protestants, despite the fact that both these scientific schools nurture the idea of great power chauvinism, close in spirit to the Church itself, the triumph of Putin's will and the overthrow of the law. Now that you already know what kind of historical experience Vladimir Putin is trying to use on the eve of the presidential elections, it's time to talk about what the ruling party of fascist Germany, the NSDAP, National Socialist German Workers' Party, was like, and what is common she may have with the now created ONF, All Russian People's Front. We are fighting against the corrupting parliamentary practice of holding positions only depending on party affiliation, without regard to character and abilities. All citizens of the state should have equal rights and duties. The activities of each citizen should not diverge from the interests of society as a whole, should proceed within the framework of society and, therefore, be directed for the common good. We demand a ruthless war on those whose activities harm the common interest. Crimes against the nation committed by usurers, speculators, etc., must be punished by death, regardless of race or creed. We demand the destruction of unearned income and percentage slavery. In view of the enormous loss of life and property required of a nation by every war, personal enrichment in time of war must be regarded as a crime against the nation. We demand, therefore, the ruthless confiscation of war profits. We demand the nationalization of industrial trusts. We demand the participation of workers and employees in the profits of large commercial enterprises. We demand a significant increase in pensions for the elderly. We demand the creation of a healthy middle class and its preservation, the immediate removal of large shops from private ownership and leasing them at cheap prices to small producers, the strictest accounting so that small producers receive public support everywhere, at the state level. We demand the adoption of a law on the gratuitous confiscation of land for public needs, the annulment of interest on mortgages, and the prohibition of land speculation. We demand a ruthless fight against crime. We demand the introduction of the death penalty for criminals, usurers, speculators, and others, regardless of social status, religious or national affiliation. In order to provide every capable and diligent opportunity to receive a higher education and occupy a leading position, the state must take care of the comprehensive development of our entire system of public education. The programs of all educational institutions must be brought into line with the requirements of practical life. From the very beginning of the development of the child's consciousness, the school should purposefully teach students to understand the idea of the state. We demand that especially talented children of poor parents, regardless of their position in society and occupation, should receive education at the expense of the state. The state must direct all efforts to improve the health of the nation, ensure the protection of motherhood and childhood, prohibit child labor, improve the physical condition of the population by introducing mandatory games and physical exercises, and supporting clubs involved in the physical development of young people. We demand an open political struggle against deliberate political lies and their dissemination in the press. We demand the announcement of an uncompromising struggle against literary and cultural trends that have a corrupting influence on our people, as well as the prohibition of all measures aimed at this. Agree that every second Russian would readily subscribe to such slogans now. Simple, correct words that succinctly and accurately convey the main aspirations of the majority of citizens of our country. Only these words are not taken from the program of the United Russia Party, and even not from the program of the All-Russian Popular Front, for which Putin decided to create an entire institute. These slogans were first announced by Adolf Hitler on February 24, 1920 at a meeting of his associates in Munich Beer Hofbrauhaus. On April 1, 1920, this short manifesto, called 25 Points, became the official program of the NSDAP. In 1926, its provisions were declared unshakable, and in 1932, following the results of parliamentary elections, the National Socialists came to power. To achieve such success, Adolf Hitler decided to call under the banner of his party the widest range of public organizations, trade unions, and youth associations that share the views of the NSDAP and support the idea of building a united and strong Germany. Many of these institutions of civil society were quickly created by the Nazis themselves. Having rallied around the figure of the national leader, Adolf Hitler, and sharing the program goals of the Party of Power, the most influential trade unions and public organizations in Germany, including the National Socialist Union of Lawyers, became the collective members of the NSDAP, while maintaining their organizational independence and legal personality. Reich Union of German Employees, National Socialist Union of Teachers, National Socialist Association of German Doctors, National Socialist Association of German Technicians, German Labor Front, National Socialist Society for Assistance to War Victims, Veterans and Disabled, National Socialist Society for Culture, Imperial Union of Large Families of Germany for the Protection of the Family, etc. Some of them received the status of party divisions, but, in fact, they performed political and educational functions as mass public organizations. Among them, the Hitler Youth, the Union of German Girls, the National Socialist Student Union, the National Socialist Union of High School Teachers, the National Socialist Women's Union, etc. Does this remind you of anything? So, in our opinion, the analogies with modern Russia, in the context of the political situation associated with the creation of Putin's ONF, are more than obvious. Of course, there were also such black sheep who did not want to rally around the national leader in the name of the prosperity of a strong Germany. They were dealt with quite simply. Public organizations that were created before the founding of the NSDAP and had nothing to do with it were renamed and subordinated to the corresponding Reichsleiter or the profile organization of the Party of Power. Everything. The principle of NSDAP party building is also surprisingly reminiscent of the approach that, 70 years later, United Russia will be guided by. Like the current Party of Power, the NSDAP was formed according to the territorial principle and had a pronounced hierarchical structure: party curators of constituencies, Gauleiters, local branches, and even blocks that at the grassroots party level united from 40 to 60 households. For those who don't know yet, let me explain. In April 2011, United Russia launched the party project, Management House, the purpose of which is to provide each house with a special Edrokommissar. He will keep order, explain to residents the benefits of raising tariffs for housing and communal services, and shape public opinion, in full accordance with the general line of the Party of Power. This was reported not without sarcasm by the press service of A Just Russia. The fact that the house manager is a fighter of the ideological front is understandable. But here's the mechanism of permanent, shitty agitation, which will be launched by the ubiquitous building managers. This is truly a new word in black PR. Imagine, for example, a zealous Edrokommissar who, on election day, blocks left-wing voters in a stuck elevator. Funny. But there is some truth in this joke. Says the site, Fair. Are you? However, let us continue the comparative analysis of the two political constructions. At the top of the pyramid of party power in the NSDAP was the party chairman, Adolf Hitler, who had virtually unlimited powers. But the chairman of the NSDAP himself, overloaded with state affairs as the Prime Minister of Germany, did not engage in party building. Instead of him, this was done by the Deputy Führer, Rudolf Hess, who led the party apparatus, and Martin Bormann, who led the party headquarters, later transformed into the party chancellery. Agree, analogies with the current political situation in Russia suggest themselves. How it all ended up in Germany is well known. How all this will end in Russia remains to be seen. The polar bear, personifying the doctrine of the Northern tradition, which is a symbol of Putin's party of power, is depicted moving from west to east. What kind of trends this Arctigate totem carries with it is now completely clear. Isn't that why Vladimir Putin voiced his bold initiatives to create the All-Russian People's Front, on the political platform of United Russia, on the eve of Victory Day, and even in Stalingrad? It is understandable why anyone who dares to even hint at the German ancestry of Putin's initiative will be immediately accused of blasphemy and desecration of the great victory, the memory of the heroes of the past war and millions of victims of fascism. Needless to say, Putin's tactical move, from the point of view of political technology, turned out to be practically a win-win. But in the strategic dimension, by the way, an attempt to transfer the organizational and political experience of the Third Reich to the rails of managed democracy has already been made. And in Germany itself, after the end of World War II. What is this about? When the party of power in the GDR until 1989 was the SED, Socialist Unity Party of Germany, the key public organizations that stood on the political platform of the SED united in the National Front of Democratic Germany. It was a single list of candidates from the People's Front that was offered to voters in the elections to the People's Chamber of the GDR. According to this list, representatives of the Association of Free German Trade Unions, the Democratic Women's Union of Germany, the Union of Free German Youth and the Cultural Union passed to Parliament, those public organizations that represented the corresponding strata of German society in Parliament, albeit under different names, even under Hitler. The main democratic difference between the political structure of post-war East Germany and the party model of the Third Reich was that the German Democratic Republic formally still had a multi-party system. In addition to the SED, deputies from the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, were represented in the People's Chamber of the GDR, the Liberal Democratic Party of Germany, LDPD, the National Democratic Party of Germany, NPD, and the Democratic Peasants' Party of Germany, DKPD. But so that the systemic opposition did not have any illusions on this score, the guiding role of the SED was enshrined in the constitution of the GDR. Is it not to such a model of the political structure of Russia, and this is at best? Is the initiative to create the All-Russian Popular Front, proposed by Vladimir Putin, leading us? In the worst case, as you understand, it may be what was discussed a little higher. However, in addition to political concerns about the creation of the ONF, there are still a number of aspects of a purely legal nature that allow us to talk about the disregard for the law of both the national leader himself and the party of power headed by him. What exactly are we talking about? To understand this, it is enough to reveal the text of the federal law on public associations, dated May 19, 1995, number 82 FC. First, social movement, as one of the organizational and legal forms of a public association, by virtue of Art. 9 FC 82, has no membership. It can only be members, not members. And if Vladimir Putin, as a lawyer, is not interested in such subtleties of law, then later Volodins of various kinds, who accepted applications from future members of the ONF, will have to answer for violating the law on the ground. Secondly, Art. 17 FC 82 states, intervention of public authorities and their officials in the activities of public associations, is not allowed. A public movement, in this case, the ONF, as mentioned above, is one of the organizational and legal forms of a public association. Meanwhile, VV Putin, being the highest official of the executive body of state power of the Russian Federation, the government of the Russian Federation, does not just interfere in activities, but literally steers the All-Russian People's Front. He creates a coordinating council, distributes various instructions, for example, to create the headquarters of the ONF and draw up the program of the ONF, sets deadlines, and so on. Isn't such actions by Prime Minister Vladimir Putin a flagrant violation of the current legislation of the Russian Federation? Why then is the public chamber of the Russian Federation silent? Why is the Prosecutor General's office of the Russian Federation not responding? And where is the principled and independent position of the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation? The answers to these questions, we hope, are already clear to everyone. But now, when the President of the Russian Federation, as the guarantor of the country's constitution, requires everyone to strictly comply with the current Russian legislation and international law, such legal trifles, on the eve of the 2012 elections, can become fatal both for Putin himself and for the created under Putin political project. At least at the beginning of June 2011, the country's leading sociological services had already begun to measure public opinion about the attitude of Russians to the possible resignation of the government of the Russian Federation, headed by VV Putin. The President of the Russian Federation Dmitry Medvedev, I think, will have more than enough grounds for such a decision. Possible scenarios. Although the political forecast, strictly speaking, goes beyond the scope of conspiracy theory, nevertheless, let us imagine several options for the further development of events related to the elections of State Duma deputies in December 2011 and the President of the Russian Federation in March 2012, as well as their possible consequences for the immediate political future. So, the first scenario. At the initiative of the deputies of the United Russia faction, and in reality, of course, at the direction of Vladimir Putin, a draft amendment to the current electoral legislation of the Russian Federation is submitted to the State Duma of the Russian Federation for consideration. These changes will consist in the actual return to the previous majority proportional system of elections at the federal level, to the State Duma of the Russian Federation, at the regional level, to the legislative bodies of state power of the subjects of the Russian Federation, and at the level of local self-government, to the representative bodies of LSG. The formal basis for United Russia to make such a 180-degree turn will be the decision of the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation, which considered the application of residents of the village of Komodanino, Chelyabinsk region, about the violation of their constitutional rights as non-partisan citizens to be elected to the local village council, and changed its legal position on the issue of interpreting the relevant norms of the Constitution. According to the results of the elections to the State Duma of the Russian Federation, which will be held on December 4, 2011, United Russia will receive a constitutional majority in the lower house of parliament, having passed representatives of Putin's All-Russian People's Front not only on its party list, but also where the rating of the party power will be deliberately low, in single-mandate constituencies. For the victory of the nominees from the ONF on the ground, the entire power of the administrative resource of United Russia will be used. The second block of amendments to the current legislation of the Russian Federation will provide for a change in the procedure for the formation of the Cabinet of Ministers, namely, the right to nominate the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation will have a political party, or faction, that has a qualified majority of seats in the State Duma of the Russian Federation. According to the results of the elections in December 2011, this will be United Russia, ONF faction. Already at the first plenary session of the lower house of parliament, the frontline soldiers nominated VV Putin, and the State Duma will approve him in this capacity by an overwhelming number of votes. At the extraordinary Congress of the United Russia Party, Vladimir Putin will be nominated as a candidate for the post of President of the Russian Federation, in connection with which, as a law-abiding citizen, in January 2012 he will take a vacation, entrusting the temporary duties of Prime Minister to Vyacheslav Volodin. After the victory of VV Putin in the election of the President of Russia, VV Volodin will be approved by the State Duma as chairman of the government of the Russian Federation. It is he who will bear the entire burden of responsibility for the further socio-economic consequences of Putin's rule. Putin himself, not formally responsible for the actions of the Cabinet of Ministers, will fully control all branches of government, playing the role of national leader and engaging in international politics. As you already understood, this scenario takes DA Medvedev has the role of a passive observer, who will only have to make a good face when the game is bad. Second scenario. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev puts all responsibility for the failure of the economic and administrative reform in the country on the government of the Russian Federation and dismisses the Cabinet of Ministers in full force, including Vladimir Putin. Medvedev's decisive actions are not only positively perceived by the elite of the country, which is psychologically tired of Putin and his methods of tightening the screws and twisting the arms, but also by the general population, which is beginning to perceive the incumbent president, who threw off the Putin yoke, already as a sovereign master his position. The pre-election rating of Dmitry Medvedev is growing, Vladimir Putin, respectively, is falling. The quasi-political structure of the All-Russian Popular Front crumbles like a house of cards in a matter of days. The anti-rating of United Russia breaks all records. Other political parties, on the contrary, are being revived. A real renaissance is being experienced by a Just Russia, whose former leader, Sergei Mironov, is gaining rapidly growing popularity in the field of anti-Putin rhetoric. Dmitry Medvedev is forming a new cabinet of ministers, making appointments that win the approval of the vast majority of the population. In fact, Medvedev's actions are beginning to take on a pre-election populist character, but against the backdrop of Putin's stagnation, they are perceived as a positive sign of renewal. The State Duma, in which the majority of seats still belong to United Russia, refuses to approve the candidate proposed by Medvedev as the chairman of the government. The deputies behave defiantly, knowing full well that on the eve of the next parliamentary elections, the State Duma cannot be dissolved. The results of the parliamentary elections held on December 4, 2011 bring United Russia a resounding defeat. Sergei Mironov becomes the chairman of the State Duma of the Russian Federation with the support of the Fair Russians, rightists, who had changed their name by that time, and Tsarinovites. The Duma opposition consists of two warring camps, United Russia, and the Communist Party, which makes it easy to manipulate them, achieving the desired result when voting. The broad party coalition mentioned above nominates D.A. Medvedev as a candidate for the president of the Russian Federation, and he wins a landslide victory in these elections. As you understand, this scenario assigns the role of a passive observer to Putin, who, you see, is difficult to imagine as a kind of loser who lost the fight to his yesterday's pupil. Third scenario. Both tandem-democrats, Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, declare their desire to join the struggle for the post of President of Russia. Putin in his desire to regain the presidency is supported by United Russia, Medvedev, in his desire to keep this chair for himself, all political forces dissatisfied with Putin and the dominance of United Russia. At the same time, no split in the elite, which is what experts and analysts biased by the party of power are now so afraid of, will not happen. The elite will be divided in their likes and dislikes for both candidates, which is a perfectly normal process in any democratic society when it comes time to choose. The total use of the administrative resource in the interests of the victory of one of the candidates will be extremely difficult, since the natural mechanism of mutual control from both election headquarters will turn on. There will be a struggle for every vote of the elector, which will finally acquire its value. In a stubborn and honest struggle with a slight margin in the second round, the strongest will win, the one who, with his election program, will inspire greater confidence in the Russians. To be honest, we see this scenario as the best for Russia. But it is this scenario, as you understand, that has the most minimal chances of being implemented for reasons that are quite obvious to everyone. It's a pity. Such a case, when not Putin's notorious vertical of power, but a completely viable model of political competition, which will become the basis for the emergence of real, and not imaginary institutions of civil society, can objectively emerge in the country, may not appear in the near future. If at least 6 more years are lost for the country, this lagging behind the pace of development of modern world processes can be fatal and eventually lead to the collapse of the state. But that's a completely different story. Thank you for downloading the book in the free electronic library royalib.ru. http://royalib.ru. Leave a review about the book, http://royalib.ru/comment/osovin_Igor/Putin_prot4_Medvedeva_pod_koviram.html. All books by the author, http://royalib.ru/author/osovin_Igor.html.